Chapter 384. Sir, Constance finally managed to greet him after holding back for a long time. What happened? Hanjin looked at Guevara. The situation is not good. Guevara sighed and said to Constance, "Do you want to tell him? Or should I?" "You should tell him." Constance bowed. "Kane, is the magic projection ready?" Guevara asked. "It's almost done. If there is anything missing, I can fill it in," Kane said as he stretched out his hand and pushed up. The special magic lamp in his hand slowly rose. Guevara walked to the table and lifted the red cloth. The whole table was made of pure crystal. Under the illumination of the magic lamp, a majestic picture appeared on the table. There were mountains, rivers, and vast plains. Hanjin had seen this kind of thing in the capital of elements, but he did not expect to see it on the god of war. He could not help but look at Yelena. The principle of this magic projection is very simple. Yelena smiled and said, "I learned it in half a day. Kane is also very smart. I only taught him a few times, and he learned it." Simple? Simple doesn't mean it is worthless. Guevara said seriously, "You two listen to me. Without my permission, no matter what, you are not allowed to teach the technique of making magic projections to anyone." Understood. Yelena smiled. She was destined to be the first lady. Among all the people on the God of War, only Guevara could speak to her in such a tone. "These black dots are the various cities. The red ones are ours, the gray ones are the orcs, and the green ones are the elves." Guevara pointed out, after the sudden attack of the orcs, the elves suffered heavy losses. Their main forces were composed of three major tribes. One was the army of Wild Willow City, another was the Southern Forest tribe represented by Prudence, and the last was the Emerald tribe from the neutral zone. According to the news brought back by Constance, the elves lost almost half of their forces. This place was originally the base of the Emerald tribe's Silver Pegasus Legion. It was also the location of the elves' joint senate, so Forza targeted this place. By the way, Raphael, you've been there before, right? Huh. Unfortunately, you couldn't change the result. The Emerald tribe's Silver Pegasus Legion was almost completely wiped out. In the end, hundreds of elven senators jointly released the Forbidden Spell and the Hymn of Life to delay the attack of the orcs and protect a small number of senators and the remaining elves from the battlefield. Bite City and Fort Maxine were also the main targets of the orcs. Bite City also suffered heavy losses. It is said that the elves continued to resist the attack of the orcs even after losing more than half of their forces. Later, Galbin appeared in Bite City and persuaded several patriarchs to take over the command. He ordered the elven warriors to gradually withdraw from the battlefield and avoid the fate of being completely wiped out. In comparison, Fort Maxine's situation was the best. Lydia gave the order to retreat in time. Although they paid a price, their main force was preserved. Guevara paused for a moment and continued. "Actually, the elves are not weak, but their forces are too scattered. They even have a garrison in the faraway Black Raven City. Sigh. The orcs, on the other hand, have gathered their forces on the same front and advanced together. No matter which city they attack, they can always maintain their advantage and attack with numbers." "What is this place?" Hanjin saw a large area of green gathered in a place. This is the main force of the elves, but compared to the heyday of the Elven Coalition, their forces are only a quarter of what they used to be. A large number of elves were scattered and fled in all directions. "You just said that the situation was not good? Does that mean the elves' forces have been severely weakened?" "That is only one aspect." Guevara sighed softly. "Also, the internal situation of the elves is very unstable." "Oh." Hundreds of elders worked together and released the life hymn. They used their own sacrifices to make up for their mistakes and were forgiven by many elves. Guevara glanced at Constance. Also, Great Elder Amjula and Prudence survived, especially Amjula. He publicly admitted his mistakes in a meeting attended by all the patriarchs. To punish himself, he actually blinded one of his eyes in front of everyone. He also said that the reason he left one of his eyes was because he wanted to use that eye to see how the orcs perished. "Constance, weren't you there? Tell me about it." "All right." Constance coughed dryly. The scene was very shocking. All the patriarchs, including Lady Lydia, were stunned. And when Great Elder Amchula said that he wanted to use his remaining eye to see how the orcs perished, many of the elves burst into tears. Originally, Constance stammered and could not continue. Originally what? Originally, the meeting was called by Lady Lydia. She was going to abolish the United Senate and strip Prudence of his command, but an Amchula blinded his own eye in front of everyone and softened the hearts of the elven patriarchs? Han Jean sneered. Yes. Constance lowered her head. Amchula insisted on speaking for a long time. He said that the elves were facing an unprecedented threat and were even on the brink of destruction. In such a time of crisis, all the elves must be united. United? That's the theme song of Amchula's speech. Han Jean said coldly, generally speaking, wise leaders don't deliberately ask their subordinates and people to stay united because their choices are always right. In one victory after another, people have heard, seen, and gained all kinds of benefits. Therefore, they don't need anyone to remind or teach them. People will naturally gather around them. The so-called unity is nothing more than asking others to forgive their mistakes and stupidity, and giving them the power and opportunity to continue making mistakes and stupidity. Constance mumbled and did not say a word. Was Galbin there? Yes. What did he say? Then he left. Left? Yes. When Amchula blinded his own eye, I saw Galbin was stunned for a moment before he stood up and clapped for Amchula. Then he left the meeting hall laughing. Looks like Galbin is a smart guy. He immediately understood Amchula's intention. Guevara said slowly. He actually backed off? Han Jean couldn't help but frown. He had talked with Lydia and knew that Galbin had made up his mind to carry out internal reforms among the elves. He had thought that a strong man who could win Lydia's respect should be very courageous and resourceful. But he didn't expect that Galbin would give up the struggle. I can understand Galbin's difficulties, Guevara said. Oh, it would be much easier if he wanted to do it alone. But Galbin wants to lead the elves out of this predicament. First, he needs to gain the approval of all the elves. Radical methods will not work. Guevara sighed softly. Galbin is an excellent commander. To be honest, I learned from him when I was young. As for his abilities, I won't say much. In terms of the rhythm of war, judgment, and control, he is enough to become a legendary hero. But in terms of politics, this is not what he is good at. If he wants to snatch the highest authority from Amchula's hands, it will be difficult. Looks like I need to help him, Han Jean said slowly. Help? How do you want to help? Guevara was stunned and hurriedly asked. I will only cooperate with Galbin. If I pass on my attitude to him, it should help him, right? Han Jean realized that he had let it slip, so he changed the topic. Is there any other news? Forza has already gained the upper hand. He is not letting go of the main force of the elves, but he has also divided his troops into 3 groups. Guevara tapped on the table with his hand. One group is coming straight for us. Another group is going straight to the west, probably to attack Black Raven City. Another group is going to attack Isolated Cliff City. Although Isolated Cliff City is always a neutral city, I don't think anyone knows better than us about its resources. Without the help of Isolated Cliff City, even if we could create what we have today, it would have taken us at least a few years. It seems that Forza is coveting the wealth of Isolated Cliff City. Isolated Cliff City is not that easy to capture, Han Jean said slowly. Dwight Steele's Dragon Singer mercenary group is still in Isolated Cliff City. Coupled with the strength of the Business Alliance and the Mercenary Association, as well as a large number of high-grade mercenaries, the orcs will have a hard time, unless they send out their main force. The problem is that we have to help Isolated Cliff City. Otherwise, I won't be able to face my old friends. Guevara smiled. When I first came to Isolated Cliff City to ask for help, they had sacrificed a lot. Everyone knows it, right? I didn't say that we won't help, but we need to think carefully about how to help. Han Jean pointed at a black line. Is this the orc army that is coming to attack us? It may be, but it may also not be. Guevara pondered for a moment. I don't know what Forza wants to do. His behavior is a bit strange. If he wants to attack Holy Crown City, The army he sent out is a bit weak. If he wants to harass us, the orcs have been lingering in this area and haven't gone deep into the territory of Holy Crown City. I guess Forza wants to warn us and test our attitude, on the other hand. Hanjin nodded slowly. He was thinking. Raphael, what do you think we should do? Guevara asked. Drive them away? This may alert Forza to our hostility. He may even change his target and attack Holy Crown City first. This is not in our interest. If it was before, Guevara would not ask for Han Jin's opinion, unless it was a matter of great importance. But now it was different. He could feel the change in Han Jin, so he paid more attention to Han Jin's opinions and views. But he also clearly expressed his own preference. He did not agree to attack, but wanted to wait. Constance sighed secretly in her heart. If it was in the interest of Holy Crown City, it certainly would not be in the interest of the elves. Now most elves hoped that Han Jin could launch an attack to share the pressure of the elves, but she could not ask for such a request. It was too shameless. What were the elves thinking when they attacked Han Jin? How could they be qualified to ask Han Jin to share the pressure? Let's wait, Han Jin said softly. He had his own plan. The next moment, his eyes fell on a little green dot. In the dead ashes, the little green dot was particularly conspicuous. Where is that? It's Wild Willow City, Guevara replied softly. Wild Willow City did not fall. Han Jin was surprised. Lady Sunir has walked out of the illusion of the temple, Constance said loudly. Her voice was full of pride, but the corner of her eyes was glancing at Yelena, because Yelena's hand was on Han Jin's arm. Under the leadership of Lady Sunir, Wild Willow City has repelled hundreds of attacks from the orcs. Thousands of orc warriors could do nothing. Wait, who are you talking about? Yelena's eyes widened. It's Lady Sunir. Constance's tone was proud and firm, as if she was issuing a challenge. Lady Sunir has been training hard in the illusion of the temple for almost half a year and has finally unlocked the mark of God. She has become the third powerhouse of life after Prudence and Galbin. What a joke! Yelena sensed the hostility. If Constance was proud, then Yelena was arrogant. She said with a contemptuous tone, Sunir has been in the illusion of the temple for half a year. So how did she get married to Prudence? How did she bring Prudence and Maxwell to frame us? That was Prudence's scheme. That Sunir is fake. Constance said with the same contemptuous tone. The real Sunir has always been in the illusion of the temple. Regarding this, Lord Raphael has known for a long time. Miss Yelena, you have no right to question it. Yelena's face suddenly turned pale, and her eyes almost stopped moving. After a long while, she turned her stiff neck and looked at Han Jin. She cried, Raphael, tell me, this is not real. This is not real. Han Jin sighed softly. He slowly reached out and hugged Yelena's waist, but his eyes were looking at Constance. He said coldly, Do you believe that I will cut off your tongue? Just nod your head. I will do it. Majordomo Gale's expression became extraordinarily cold. Constance did not expect Han Jin's reaction to be so strong. She lowered her head timidly and did not dare to speak again. Seeing that Han Jin did not deny it, Yelena understood that everything the elf said was true. She felt like her heart had died and suddenly burst into tears. She pushed Han Jin away and rushed out of the room. Majordomo Gale glared at Constance fiercely and hurried out. He knew that Yelena's personality was very weak, and he was worried that something bad would happen. Han Jin stared at Constance quietly, and then walked forward step by step. Although his vital energy had not recovered, his body was emitting an indescribable pressure. Constance was a little frightened and could not help but take a few steps back. You can attack me, but you should not provoke Yelena on purpose. Do you understand? Han Jin said calmly. I won't allow it. I didn't. Before Constance could finish, Han Jin suddenly reached out and grabbed Constance's neck. He used a lot of strength and actually lifted Constance up. He then pushed her down, and with a loud thud, Constance's body landed heavily on the table. King could not help but grimace. He did not care about his energy and time, but the crystal table was worth money. Constance felt like her neck was about to be broken. She could not even breathe, let alone beg for mercy. Her arms and legs wriggled weakly. If a normal person encountered such a situation, they would subconsciously grab the other party's hand. But Constance did not dare. The murderous intent in Han Jin's eyes was too cold. She was worried that if she did anything else, the situation would be irreversible. She could give up her life, but the consequences were not something she could bear. For the first time, I can let you go. Han Jin slowly bent down, and the people around him could even hear the creaking of his bones. Go back and tell Lydia, tell Gao Bin, tell all the elves that if anyone dares to provoke Yelena again, I will make them regret having life. If you are unhappy, you can come at me. I will wait for you. Do you understand? Ha! Master, I can do that. Harley laughed strangely. When he came to Han Jin had already passed his weak stage and was growing rapidly. Harley had never seen Han Jin and Sunir go through life and death together. He only knew that Yelena would not hesitate to die for Han Jin. So, if he had to choose between the two, Harley would lean towards Yelena. Constance wanted to reply to Han Jin that she really understood, but she could not utter a single word. After being suffocated for so long, she felt like she was about to lose control of her bladder. She was so anxious that she was hitting the table with her hands and legs while blinking her eyes desperately. Han Jin snorted and threw Constance out. Constance hit the wall head first and rolled to the ground. She was half bent over and let out a painful shriek. Fortunately, Han Jin had great self-control and did not use too much strength. Otherwise, not only would he have killed Constance, he would have also broken her neck. Han Jin slowly turned around and walked out. He smiled bitterly and called out, Raphael. Han Jin answered, but he did not turn around. Sunir is very lucky, Guevara said slowly. She was attacked by the orcs as soon as the Mark of God was unlocked. Moreover, Forsyth didn't send his main force to defend Wild Willow City, because almost all the forces in the city were exhausted. In other words, Sunir is defending the city with her own strength. What does this have to do with her luck? You still don't understand what this means. Guevara smiled. In battles where she is close to her limit, Sunir will grow at an unimaginable speed. In the end, she will completely master that power. As far as I know, both Gao Bin and Prudence spent more than 10 years or even dozens of years to fully mature their powers. Now that the orcs are here to help her train, this is a rare opportunity, so don't disturb her. Compared to Sunir, Yelena is the one who needs your care. I know, Han Jin replied in a low voice, but I'll go to Wild Willow City. Chapter 385. My lord, this is the place, Cortini said as he moved to the side. Han Jin nodded, slowly walked over, gently pushed open the door, and stepped in. This was a very simple room with nothing but a bed, a table, and 2 armchairs. A well-dressed old man with a gloomy face was sitting on one of the armchairs. Seeing Han Jin's figure, the 2 people's eyes immediately collided. Han Jin's expression was very calm, but the old man's eyes were hiding anger. This was nothing strange. As an elder of Dragon City, he came thousands of miles here to negotiate with a human, but enjoyed the feeling of being on the cold bench. This was intolerable. Even the superior dragons in Dragon City had to be respectful to him, and now, the one who deliberately gave him the cold shoulder was a human. Finally, someone came. The old man's tone was not a problem. You are Lord Raphael? Yes. Han Jin indifferently replied, sitting on the other armchair. You brought the heart of a dragon god? The old man did not want to continue talking nonsense with Han Jin and directly went to the point. He wanted to leave as soon as possible. Han Jin was obviously stunned. His gaze once again turned to the old man, but this time it turned very slowly. His face was full of mischief, and after a moment, he slowly said, You drank too much? What do you mean? The old man's expression changed greatly. Nothing. Han Jin leaned back in the chair, showing a lazy expression. He no longer looked at the old man and looked around the room in boredom. In short, your attitude determines your height, and your height determines my attitude. The old man was stunned. Han Jin's words contained a hidden meaning, and he did not know how to answer for a moment. You still don't understand? Then I'll explain. Han Jin smiled. I am a very easygoing person, and I speak human language when I see people. Let's put it this way. When I meet a scholar, I become very gentle. When I meet a magician, I become very mysterious. When I meet a warrior, I become bold and unrestrained. If I meet a hooligan, I will definitely become very, very rude. The old man was furious. Han Jin was beating around the bush to call him a hooligan, but now was not the time to lose his temper. He took a deep breath and said coldly, Lord Raphael, is this your sincerity? You misunderstand the meaning of the word sincerity. Han Jin indifferently said, sincerity means that both of us are willing to cooperate and can also be modest to each other and sit down to discuss carefully to carefully maintain the newly formed trust of both sides. And what did you do? I just walked through the door, and you took away my last appendix. This is beyond the scope of sincerity. You did not mention what you can do for me. This is sacrifice, forcing me to make a unilateral sacrifice. The information I received is somewhat different from what you said. The old man's voice was still very cold, but he finally used honorifics. As far as I know, you want to offer the heart of the dragon god to Dragon City, in order to ask for Dragon City's forgiveness. I changed my mind. Han Jin smiled. The old man was choked speechless. Even his chest was about to explode. He looked at Han Jin fiercely. Are you playing with Dragon City? Have you thought about whether you can bear the consequences? I have no choice. This world is changing too fast. Han Jin shrugged. The appearance of Shazos, the guardian of the dragon realm, gave me two choices, you or you. The Dragon City represented by you is not the only one. What the old man wanted to do most now was to restore his dragon form and use his dragon breath to turn this damn holy crowned city into ashes. He even reached the point where he could not vent his anger with magic, but he could only think about it. The strength of this young man in front of him was unfathomable, and the guardian of the dragon realm, Shazos, was also here. If he really wanted to do something, he would be the one to die. What's more, he did not dare to make the negotiation deadlock, because the heart of the dragon god was too important. For most of the strong people on the continent, the heart of the dragon god was not useful. This was the reason why the heart of the dragon god was far less ranked than the dragon god armor. Only the dragon race, who had the heart of the dragon god, could possibly become an invincible existence. The heart of the dragon god could constantly replenish one's magic power, stamina, and injuries. It didn't sound like much, but for a superior dragon, it was the most suitable divine tool. Although the dragon race had a vast amount of magic power, there was a limit after all. For example, Maxwell, because he released 2 sealing forbidden spells in a row, he almost exhausted his magic power, so he died in the hands of Han Jin. If Maxwell was in his peak state, Han Jin's unique skill, no matter how powerful it was, may not be able to kill Maxwell. Just take the dragon breath as an example. A superior golden dragon could continuously release hundreds of dragon breaths before it was exhausted. An ordinary green dragon could only release 20 or 30 dragon breaths, and then it would be unable to continue fighting. If a dragon really had the heart of the dragon god, he could continuously release dragon breaths, even for a year without stopping, and the replenishment of power was far greater than the consumption. It was hard to imagine how terrifying a superior dragon that could continuously release forbidden spells would be. Of course, it was not to say that he could release them one after another. He also needed to rest for a while. If Maxwell had the heart of the dragon god back then, he would not have been so passive. It was precisely because of the powerful effect of the heart of the dragon god that the black dragon race had evil intentions. Strictly speaking, the black dragon race was more powerful than the golden dragon race. Golden dragons would be damaged by magic, while black dragons were immune to all elemental effects. If a meteorite fell from the sky, although the black dragon would also be injured by the meteorite, it could completely ignore the burning of the fire element. This could make the black dragon race invincible, because there were not many high-level magic that included physical damage. Soaring high in the sky, constantly releasing magic, and the opponent's magic could hardly hurt the black dragon. How could such a monster resist? It could also be said that it was more suitable for the black dragon race to have the heart of the dragon god than for the golden dragon race. However, no one would hand over their alliance. The black dragon race secretly carried out a sneak attack, but it was seen through. In the end, a protracted war broke out because the golden dragon race received the support of other surface races. The black dragon race could not withstand it and was driven underground. Also, because of their hatred for the surface races, the black dragon race degenerated and became the comrade in arms of the abyss race. However, the heart of the dragon god had been missing for thousands of years. The elders of the dragon race originally thought that Han Jin was talking nonsense, but the token that Han Jin asked the green dragon to bring back made them have no choice but to pay attention to Han Jin's news. Therefore, it was absolutely impossible for the old man to fall out with Han Jin. However, seeing Han Jin's idle appearance, he was really angry in his heart. He suddenly stood up. In that case, there's no point in continuing our discussion. He was retreating in order to advance, trying to force out Han Jin's bottom line. His eyes were fixed on Han Jin. As long as Han Jin showed any mood change, he would immediately catch it. All right. Han Jin straightened his legs and found a very comfortable posture. Go out of this door to the left, that is, to the west. I will let my people inform the soldiers to open the city gate for you. I advise you not to use the flying skill, which is an invasion of the airspace of the Holy Crown City. Otherwise, you will have to bear the consequences. Are you threatening me? The old man was trembling with anger. In the past thousands of years, all the contempt and insults he had suffered were not as much as today. Whatever you think. Han Jin smiled as if nothing had happened. But you'd better do as I say. Han Jin didn't say the following words clearly, but the old man understood the meaning of Han Jin's words. Since I can kill Maxwell, I can also kill you. The atmosphere became extremely tense. The old man stared at Han Jin. At this point, he only had two choices. One was to fight back and even fight with Han Jin. The other was to admit defeat and continue the negotiation. However, if he chose the former, he would have to make unnecessary sacrifices. In the Holy Crown City, which was surrounded by strong enemies, he couldn't fight against Han Jin. If he chose the latter, then his strength at the beginning would be extremely ridiculous. Why bother? He didn't want to choose either one, but he had to choose. The old man's brain was running fast. He felt that he was going crazy. Although he was experienced and knowledgeable, he had never met such a stinky and stubborn human like Han Jin. And the young man in front of him had the qualification to be stubborn to the end. Finally, he thought of the heart of the dragon god. Could he give up Dragon City? Absolutely not. If the dragon realm got the heart of the dragon god, it would be a devastating disaster for Dragon City. I don't understand. I really don't understand. The old man sat down little by little. What benefits did Shazos, the guardian of the dragon realm, give you to make you stand on the side of the dragon realm so firmly? Han Jin smiled and took out a small glass bottle from his space ring. He tipped it down, and a ball of light purple, star-like sand rolled out. The heavenly Tao that he had refined was bright purple, and the rest of the star metal was just scraps. Because he couldn't control all of the star metal with his spiritual sense, a small portion of it was directly blown away by the purple heaven tribulation and didn't complete the final refinement. However, star metal was still good stuff. He asked Harley and Hogan to collect all of the remaining star metal and prepare to refine another magic weapon. This is star metal? The old man looked at it for a long time before he recognized it. How did it become this color? Yes, Han Jin answered softly. He couldn't be bothered to answer the old man's last question. There was no need to. This was given to you by Shazos? The old man smiled. But it seems like you're not the kind of person who can be bought off so easily. That's why I'm here. That's why I'm interested in talking to you. Han Jin smiled back. The old man noticed that Han Jin was finally using honorifics. He relaxed a little. He suddenly felt that this young man didn't seem so smelly and stubborn. It could only be said that he had chosen the wrong way to approach him. Your choice is very wise. The old man's smile grew wider, but it still seemed a little stiff. He couldn't blame anyone. Jin had seriously hurt his heart just now. Those guys from the Dragon Realm are all unreliable. Did you know? The Dragon Realm has supported a lord named Nicholas in the southwest region. They have connections with other lords in this area, such as Solomon, Che-Sam, and Malishan. Ha! Do you understand? The Dragon Realm only treats you as playthings. They will never treat you as real friends. Playing is always better than plundering. It's also easier for people to accept. What do you think? Jin replied calmly. The old man understood that Jin was still dissatisfied with his unyielding attitude at the beginning. He cleverly changed the topic. Shazos, that idiot, actually wants to use some star metal to exchange for the Dragon Realm's divine artifact. He's crazy. Oh, you mean? Jin's eyes were filled with the taste of unscrupulous merchants. The old man felt a little strange. At the beginning, Jin had said that he would give the heart of the dragon god to Dragon City in exchange for Dragon City's forgiveness. Now, he was blatantly asking for conditions and benefits. This made the old man's heart feel stifled. But on second thought, this was a good thing. I'm not afraid of what you want. I'm afraid you don't want anything. Yelena knelt on the bed alone, secretly weeping. Although Major Domo Gale had comforted her for a long time, she still couldn't let go. It was difficult for a woman to fully understand a man, just as it was difficult for a man to fully understand a woman. Therefore, the scene that Yelena pictured in her mind was much more terrible than what Major Domo Gale had estimated. But in Major Domo Gale's opinion, no matter what choice Jin made, he would not let Yelena down. Yelena had done a lot for Jin, and it was also through Yelena that Jin gained Solomon's trust. Abandoning Yelena in the blink of an eye? That would be too much. Major Domo Gale knew very well that Jin would not do such a thing. Jin slowly walked down the stairs. Major Domo Gale, who had been pacing back and forth in Yelena's room, greeted him and asked in surprise, "You don't look well. What's wrong?" "I'm looking for a friend." Jin sighed. "Where's Yelena? Is she still inside?" "Yes. I'll go talk to her. You're the only one who can persuade her." Major Domo Gale nodded. Jin walked to the door of Yelena's room. Just as he was about to push the door open, Major Domo Gale suddenly said, "Wait, Raphael. What's wrong?" Jin turned around. "The thing you want is here." Major Domo Gale took out a crystal box from his space ring and handed it to Jin. "The Duke didn't ask me what I wanted?" Jin asked as he took the box. "No." Major Domo Gale smiled. "I can see that the Duke trusts you very much." Jin knew why Major Domo Gale said this, but he didn't answer. Instead, he slowly pushed the door open. Through her tears, Yelena saw that it was Jin who walked into the room. She subconsciously wanted to lie on the bed and pretend to be asleep. She didn't want Jin to see her like this. After lying down, she realized that Jin must have seen her movements. She couldn't pretend anything. The more she thought about it, the more wrong she felt. Tears flowed out from the corners of her eyes again. Jin walked to the bedside, slowly reached out his hand, grabbed Yelena's shoulder, and turned her back to him. Yelena managed to control herself. As the saying goes, a woman dresses up for the one who loves her. Of course, she looked ugly when she cried. She reached out and wiped the tears off her cheeks. She wanted to tell Jin that she was fine and that she would be fine after a while. However, as soon as she opened her mouth, tears flowed out again. Her self-control quickly collapsed in the face of great pressure and cruel reality. Yelena cried, "Raphael, will you abandon me?" Yelena had a crystal-clear heart. She was willing to bloom for Jin. If she couldn't get Jin's appreciation, she would rather wither. In fact, she had already withered once. Jin only felt a stabbing pain in his heart. He bent down, and before Yelena could react, he kissed her lips with determination. Yelena felt as if she had been struck by lightning. Her eyes, which were not small to begin with, became even bigger at this moment. Her hands unconsciously grabbed the bedsheet under her and twisted it with all her strength. Her legs were straight, and her insteps were arched. Jin held Yelena's head with both hands and continued to kiss her deeply. Yelena didn't know how to cooperate at all, but she didn't resist either. At first, She was so shocked that she clenched her teeth. Han Jin teased her a few times, and she unconsciously opened her mouth, allowing the tip of Han Jin's tongue to invade and wreak havoc everywhere. A kiss without cooperation was a lot less fun, but Han Jin wasn't looking for fun. He was just trying to comfort Yelena. After kissing for a while, he slowly raised his body and gazed at Yelena. Yelena's little mouth was still open. Her eyes seemed to be looking back at Han Jin, but they also seemed to be unfocused. After a long while, she suddenly jumped up from the bed in a very violent manner. She looked like a fish that was about to die of thirst who saw water. She threw herself into Han Jin's arms, tightly wrapped her arms around Han Jin's neck, and stretched out her little mouth to kiss Han Jin's face crazily. Han Jin was just kissing, but Yelena's actions were no different from a chick pecking at rice. She had no experience and no specific target. In just a moment, Han Jin's cheeks, forehead, nose, and eyes were covered with kisses from Yelena. Her wet tears rubbed against his face. Han Jin had to hold Yelena's head again. He wasn't worried about himself, but he was worried that Yelena would be hurt. Then, his lips moved closer to Yelena's. This time, Yelena was slightly more mature. Before Han Jin's lips touched hers, she had already opened her mouth and kissed Han Jin. The two kissed for real. At first, Yelena carefully opened her eyes and secretly observed Han Jin. Later, she was immersed in the kiss. Her nostrils slightly expanded, and she breathed rapidly. Apparently, she had entered a state of selflessness. After a long time, Han Jin gently let go of Yelena. Yelena's little face was red. She curled up in Han Jin's arms and didn't dare to raise her head. "Little fool, what are you thinking?" Han Jin only dared to educate Yelena now. "I won't. I want you to promise." Yelena twisted her body slightly. "Promise?" Han Jin sighed softly. "Even if the sky falls and the earth shatters, even if the power of the gods tears everything on this continent into pieces, I will not be separated from you." T6. Yelena finally laughed through her tears, but her laughter sounded a little strange. "Nonsense. But I'm so satisfied, nonsense." A meaningful smile appeared on Han Jin's face, but Yelena didn't see it as she was curled up in his arms. The two of them became quiet. They didn't mention Sunir. Han Jin couldn't mention her, and Yelena didn't dare to. She, who was weak by nature, only wanted to protect herself in times of danger. As for other things, she didn't dare to say or think about them. Chapter 386. "Do you remember what I said?" Han Jin asked softly. "Yes, your magic power hasn't recovered yet. Be careful." Yelena had 1,000 words to say, but she didn't know where to start. Finally, she said, "Come back soon." "I know." Han Jin paused. He was still worried. "Don't tell Guevara and Majordomo Gale, understand?" He had to go out and pave the way for his plan. This time, he had to keep everyone in the dark. Otherwise, with the intelligence of Guevara, Majordomo Gale, and Jedis, it was very likely that they would notice something. Therefore, he had to go into seclusion and train in order to remove himself from suspicion, and Yelena was the best person to cover for him. "Don't worry, I won't tell anyone." Yelena nodded hard. "Then I'm leaving." Han Jin smiled and shrank into the ground. Yelena stared at the place where Han Jin disappeared. After a long time, she slowly turned around and walked back. Han Jin's vital energy had only recovered less than half, but he had no problem using Earth Meld. In order to avoid any accidental encounters, he had been sneaking underground. The night passed quickly, the east gradually turned white, and the morning sun was dyed golden. The fiery red sun silently jumped out of the horizon. When the sun crossed the sky and slowly set to the west, Han Jin finally came out of the ground. The magic projection taught by Solomon was indeed convenient. Although there were errors in the information, the specific location would not change too much. Han Jin found the battlefield almost effortlessly. After all, war was not a game to vent one's anger. Forza's strategic vision had not been fully realized. In the beginning, he launched an attack regardless of the cost, in order to destroy the elves' front as much as possible and achieve the greatest results. Now, his actions had become more cautious. His empty fort strategy could not be kept a secret for long. Had Grand Duke Solomon discovered the truth about Fado City at this moment? If Grand Duke Solomon sent troops across the swamp and insisted on fighting to the death with Forza, what should he do? Furthermore, other than the elves, he still had many enemies, such as Raphael of Holy Crown City, Lord Molly of Depew City, and Lord Chasam of Cold Shadow City. Only by preserving his strength would he be able to defeat all the stumbling blocks and establish his own hegemony. Moreover, the failure of the elves was inevitable. He didn't want to waste too many troops for the so-called perfection. However, he could not figure out the movements of the elves. He thought that the elves would definitely retreat to Wild Willow City, and Sunir, who had unlocked the Mark of God, could defend Wild Willow City with her own strength. It was not because of her strength, but because of Forza's connivance. Forza had arranged a lot of troops along the way. During the elves' retreat to Wild Willow City, he would consume the elves' strength in batches and let them enter Wild Willow City. Finally, he would wipe them out in one fell swoop. Forza was able to fight against Grand Duke Solomon for many years. His military accomplishments were beyond doubt. A real commander should not only be good at commanding his own troops, but also the enemy's army. This sentence sounded profound, but in fact, all the generals with a little fame knew this. Otherwise, they would not be able to become the best. In this case, Forza was not willing to attack Wild Willow City. Without a target, the elves would definitely escape into the mountains, which would cause endless troubles in the future. However, the response of the elves made Forza puzzled. At first, the elves were moving to the west. Forza laughed and ordered the troops to act according to the original plan. However, the elves suddenly turned to the east. Forza was very surprised. He thought that the elves must have reached an alliance with the Holy Crown City. Raphael was willing to provide protection for the elves. He hurriedly divided an army and approached the Holy Crown City to deter it. He didn't want to fight on both sides, so he called back the troops he had arranged. But the elves changed their direction again and continued to go west. Fossa secretly cursed that the elves had become so cunning that they even knew how to make a false move. He sent out messengers and strictly ordered the troops not to provoke the Holy Crown City, while he hastened to restore the original deployment. But after a few days, the elves changed their direction again and went east, drawing a big W on the map. Then, Fossa was really confused. He didn't understand what the elves were trying to do. In fact, the elves didn't want to do anything. They just wanted to survive and make the barbaric orcs pay the price. Although Abdullah the Great Elder kept his title and was still the political leader, Galbin, who had exposed the conspiracy of the orcs in advance and gained great prestige, had replaced Abdullah. In other words, Forza had changed his opponent. At first, when the news of the victory of the Wild Willow City came, Galbin didn't believe it at all. Later, after verifying the authenticity of the news, Galbin immediately judged that it was a conspiracy of Forza. There were two opinions among the elves. One was to move closer to the Wild Willow City, and the other was to launch a full counterattack. Galbin replaced the generals of all the troops in a very tough way, and then ordered the whole army to move to the east. Of course, it was impossible for Forza to understand Galbin's intentions, because Galbin himself didn't have a clear goal. He was just trying to delay time until the Holy Crown City joined the battle. Hanjin had contacted Lydia. Hanjin was willing to release all the prisoners of war and reach a settlement with the elves. Galbin knew that Hanjin also saw the danger of the orcs. He didn't believe that Hanjin would wait and deal with the orcs by himself. Now, Hanjin kept silent. Maybe he was retaliating against the invasion of the elves. He wanted to wait until both the elves and the orcs were defeated. Then he would come out to clean up the mess. Galbin was telling Hanjin with practical actions that it was over. He wouldn't let the elves pay any more unnecessary sacrifices. As for when he would do it, it was up to him. Because of the ambiguous attitude of the leaders of the two armies, although the fighting happened every day, The casualties were not too tragic, and the scale was limited. Hanjin looked down at the camp of the orcs from a distance. It was already dusk. The orcs had obviously given up the desire to continue the battle and were busy setting up the camp. Judging from the flag hanging in the center of the camp, the guy he was looking for was here. Hanjin took out a khaki-colored magic crystal from his space ring. After thinking for a while, he put it back. He was now able to absorb the energy of 8th-grade magic crystals, but he was reluctant to part with this magic crystal of the Bear of Earth. Every time he saw this magic crystal, he would be reminded of the hard days in the past. The sky gradually darkened. Hanjin pondered for a moment and then slowly withdrew into the ground. In the camp of the orcs, it was still brightly lit. The energetic orcs didn't like to rest early. Moreover, they didn't spend the past few days in vain. They had a lot of entertainment. Of course, their entertainment was often built on the pain of other lives. In the center of the camp, there was a tall tent that occupied a large area. It was almost 3 or 4 times the size of the other tents. In front of the tent, there were 2 orc warriors with scimitars. In fact, their task was to highlight the status and identity of the tent owner. If something really happened, they wouldn't be of any help. If one wanted to become a general of the orcs, one could be stupid, but one had to have great strength. The 2 orc warriors also understood their responsibilities. Therefore, although they were guards, they were absent-minded. Instead, they were watching the show in the distance with great interest. They couldn't wait for the other warriors to come and take over the guard. A figure came out from behind the tent and walked to the side of the 2 orc warriors. He softly said, "Is Rinnel inside?" The 2 orc warriors were startled. When they saw that the other party was a human, they were about to scold him. However, they suddenly felt that the other party's eyes were filled with an indescribable pressure and power. They immediately reacted. This human was actually calling Rinnel by his name. One of the orc warriors mechanically nodded. "Yes, you are. That's good." Hanjin smiled. He stretched out his hand to open the tent's curtain and walked in. Rinnel was sitting on a wide chair with his eyes closed and enjoying himself. A female elf was lying in Rinnel's arms, desperately licking Rinnel's chest that was covered with black fur. At Rinnel's feet, there were 3 other female elves. They were kneeling and squeezing together, fighting to be the first to suck Rinnel's toes and lick Rinnel's ankles. They were oblivious to their surroundings, as if they were tasting the best delicacies. Rinnel heard the conversation outside. Because someone had called his name, he was a little displeased, but he didn't act out. However, when he heard that the other party had barged in without his permission, he was immediately enraged and opened his eyes. The moment he saw Hanjin clearly, Rinnel's body involuntarily stiffened. His hands clenched into fists. In fact, even he didn't understand why he was so nervous. It was like a frog that had seen a poisonous snake. "Looks like you're very busy. It's okay. Go ahead and do what you need to do. I can wait for a while," Hanjin said with a smile. Then, he shifted his gaze and looked around with interest. Although most beastmen were very rude, no one would continue doing it in front of a stranger unless they had taken a strong aphrodisiac. Rinnel looked at Hanjin coldly and asked, "Who are you?" The tent's curtain was opened again, and 2 beastman warriors chased after him. They looked very anxious. The consequences of letting an unknown human in and disturbing the general's mood were too serious. "Answer me. Who are you?" Rinnel opened his mouth again. One of his hands had already reached down slowly and grasped the scimitar. Although the other party looked very young, he made Rinnel feel a great pressure. "Do you have time now?" Hanjin turned around. He was still smiling. "Don't misunderstand. I'm just here to talk to you about some things. Ask them to leave. It's not convenient." Rinnel thought for a moment, then waved his hand and said, "Get out." The 2 beastman warriors hurriedly retreated out of the tent as if they had been pardoned. To be able to make the proud elves become like this, I can't help but sigh. The plasticity of life is too strong. Hanjin's gaze swept across the elves. "I'm guessing you must have used a very cruel method." The female elves didn't stop moving. When they heard Hanjin's words, they couldn't help but cry. However, they still didn't dare to slow down. At least, before they got permission from Rinnel, they didn't dare to slack off. If you're just here to talk to me about this, then I can only say sorry. This is my interest. You have no right to interfere, Reynolds said coldly. And you still haven't told me who you are. My name is Raphael, Han Jin said with a smile. It's really you. Reynolds' body was already tense. He had already vaguely guessed Han Jin's identity. He then took a deep breath and said word by word, Are you here to kill me? Have you ever seen an assassin as friendly as me? Then why are you looking for me? Are you sympathizing with them? Reynolds reached out and grabbed the hair of the elf in front of his chest, almost lifting her up. I can give them to you and let you take them away. Although Reynolds believed that he had the ability to protect himself, he had to admit that Han Jin was an abnormally terrifying existence to all the strong people on the continent, especially in a situation where they were opposing each other. If he didn't have to deal with Han Jin, it would be best to avoid him. Not interested. Han Jin paused. I just heard that you were very unfortunate, so I came to see you and make friends. Han Jin's hypocrisy could be heard for dozens of kilometers. Reynolds obviously didn't believe him. Unfortunate? Are you talking about me? Yes. Why don't I know about it? What kind of misfortune do I have? Reynolds sneered. You are the eldest son of Forza, but it seems that Forza is only 17 years older than you. Han Jin said lightly. That is to say, many years later, when Forza dies of old age, you may be able to inherit his position. Even if you can have the same lifespan as Forza, you will only be happy for 17 years. Ha! How long time is now, and how short time is in the future, isn't it? I'm very curious. When your back is hunched and your eyes are blurry, where will you find your happiness? They certainly won't do. Even if there are many elves around you at that time, you will only be able to feel helplessness, sadness, and shame from them. Reynolds looked at Han Jin coldly and didn't speak. And I also doubt whether you are qualified to be Force's successor. Han Jin smiled. Your child will become a warrior soon, right? If there are no accidents, Forza can live for more than 100 years. By then, your grandson's grandson will have a grandson. Can a useless person who has lost most of his power really gain the respect and trust of all the orcs? Raphael, I respect you because you are a superior, Reynolds said coldly. But I didn't expect that the real Raphael is such a naive and ridiculous person. What are you doing? Coming here to sow discord between a father and his child? Ha! You are so funny. What I said, have you seriously thought about it? You know, and I know. Han Jin replied lightly. If we can continue to talk, we will continue. If we can't, I will turn around and leave. That's all. So should I say goodbye? Reynolds said in a sarcastic tone. I can see how much you are afraid of your father. Han Jin smiled. Before I leave, let me tell you a story. Don't worry, I will use the simplest way and won't waste much of your time. There was once a young warrior who was brave, fearless, resolute, and determined. You could see many excellent qualities in him. Of course, such a young warrior easily attracted the attention of women. Later, he fell in love with a woman. On the day of their marriage, the young warrior's father came to attend the wedding. In the end, the next day, the father ordered his son to go to war. When the young warrior gained a glorious battle record and returned to his city, he suddenly discovered that his wife had already become... Shut up! Rhinelander's face was contorted, and he let out a low growl. His eyes had turned blood red, and his protruding fangs were trembling. Foxgirl Phoebe, what a beautiful name. In the ancient language of the elves, it means the goddess of the moon. I can imagine her beauty. Han Jin said to himself. That's why Forza couldn't control his greed and stole his own son's wife, isn't it? Humiliating me. That's your purpose, isn't it? Reynolds stood up in a stiff posture and unsheathed his scimitar. The elf lying on his chest suddenly lost his balance and subconsciously grabbed Reynolds' shoulder. Reynolds reached out and grabbed the elf's hair. Blood splattered, and a headless corpse fell to the ground. In fact, several elves were scared and jumped to the side. Reynolds threw the head to the ground and said word by word, Raphael, I think you shouldn't refuse my challenge. Come. You're more impulsive than I thought. Han Jin's eyes fell on the headless corpse, and then he shook his head. If it were another time and place, I wouldn't refuse. But this time, I'm here to help you. Help me? How can you help me? Reynolds slowly arched his back and placed his scimitar in front of his chest. This was a sign that he was about to attack. You like Phoebe not only because of her appearance, but also because of her heart. You know her, and she knows you. That's why she obediently became Forza's wife. If she resisted or committed suicide, Forza would definitely kill you. Han Jin said lightly. Do you know why I said you were unlucky? Because of this, you can endure until Forza dies of old age. Then, a white-haired old man and an old woman will sigh to each other. The sunset is beautiful, but unfortunately, it's close to night. At that time, you'll have no future. Rinnell was in so much pain that he couldn't breathe. His vision turned black, and even the scimitar in his hand began to tremble. You should calm down. Otherwise, I have a way to make Forza kill Phoebe. Han Jin said slowly. I can't do anything else, but this is definitely not a problem. You'd better believe me. She endured so many insults to protect you. You should do something for her, right? And I'm here to help you regain your dignity. Chapter 387. Thank you for your kindness. The scimitar in Lionel's hand finally dropped, but his tone was still cold. Although he was no longer qualified to fight Han Jin to the death due to other reasons, he would not give up his persistence. Thank you? It seems that you don't want to accept my help. Han Jin smiled. I will not betray the orcs, nor will I be used by anyone to slaughter my own people. You misunderstood. Han Jin shook his head. I need the power of the orcs, so I only need to deal with Forza. You need the power of the orcs? Rinnell sneered. Lord Raphael, as a superior, you don't need to be so hypocritical. You think too much. In fact, I don't need to deceive you, Han Jin said lightly. Ha! Do you really think I can't see your intention? If you destroy the orcs, the weakened elves will be no match for you. In this way, you will become the most powerful lord in this area. Without the orcs and elves, I will have to face Grand Duke Solomon directly. Han Jin smiled. We know your relationship with Yelena. Will Grand Duke Solomon pose a threat to you? What a joke. You are too shallow. As the son of Forza, you are not on the same side as him. How can I be at peace with Grand Duke Solomon? Han Jin said softly. More than a year ago, you sent messengers to isolated Cliff City and bribed mercenaries to attack Yelena. Now, let me ask you, where did you get the news about Yelena? Rinnell's expression finally changed, and then he pondered. Han Jin's words were harsh. Rinnell knew the inside story, and he suddenly realized that it was not as simple as he thought. Before I am strong enough, I don't want to face Grand Duke Solomon. You should know better than me how terrible he is. Han Jin said slowly, so my idea is to stop the war between the orcs and the elves, return Wild Willow City to the elves, and give Bite City to the elves. It was originally the capital of the Orc Federation, so your wish will be fulfilled. I want Black Raven City and the Holy Crown City. You're responsible for blocking Grand Duke Solomon for me. I will turn my attention to the north. Sam? Not bad. Lionel frowned and pondered. He had already understood Han Jin's purpose, worries, and difficulties. Furthermore, he had analyzed Han Jin's words carefully. Han Jin's words were highly credible. In fact, Han Jin's choice of words was not clever. If Forza were here, he would probably laugh his head off. Who do you think you are? With only a few words from you, or your will, you can stop a war and resolve the deep hatred made by countless lives? But Rinnell could not think too much about it, because of the knot between him and Forza. Forza would never teach him tactics. Everything he had now was almost comprehended by himself. As the saying goes, the master can show you the way, but it is up to you to learn. Han Jin's qualifications were very good. Otherwise, his master would not have chosen him in a vast sea of people. Together with Grand Duke Solomon, he had paid a lot of effort to get to where he was today. However, Rinnell had none. Even if his qualifications were better than Han Jin's, he would never surpass Han Jin. Of course, my idea may not come true. There may be other changes. Han Jin sighed. What changes do you mean? Maybe will only take half a year, maybe more than 10 years, for the army of the Abyss race to appear on the ground. The Second Continental War will definitely break out. Hanjin paused. According to my original plan, I was going to deal with Chae-Sam, but I was very conflicted. If Chae-Sam is willing to reconcile with Lord Malith, I can maintain peace with him. The Continental War concerns the life and death of all the races on the ground. We must unite. The army of the Abyss race? Rinal's eyes widened. After a while, he shouted, "That's impossible." "Nothing is impossible," Hanjin said slowly. "Do you know why I would rather give up the Bite Man and attack Zagund? Because he is the minion of the Abyss Great Demon Donald. In fact, Zagund did not forget his own race. He had always been vigilant against the Abyss Great Demon Donald. But for the sake of the overall situation in the plan, he could only splash dirty water on Zagund. How do you know? It's a secret. Just like my magic, before completely defeating the Abyss race, I must keep my secret." Rinal stared at Hanjin blankly. Today, Hanjin came to him to discuss how to deal with his father, Forza. This already made him feel incredulous. Later, he heard more and more shocking news. He was speechless. "Now, what do you understand? Whether it is to stop Grand Duke Solomon or to deal with the Second Continental War, I need the power of the orcs." Rinal did not answer. He slowly walked in circles in the tent. After a moment, he suddenly turned around and asked, "Why do you have to target my father? Wouldn't it be better to talk to him directly?" Forza is an extremely selfish guy. Otherwise, why would he take away his own son's wife because of his own greed? In his eyes, nothing is more important than himself. Hanjin said softly, "I even suspect that if the great demon Donald gives him enough benefits, he will even change his stance and stand on the side of the Abyss race. Let's not talk about me. Let's talk about you. If you had such a comrade, would you believe him? Would you dare to believe him?" "No, I won't," Lionel said slowly. He felt that Hanjin's words were too satisfying. "I need a new and firm comrade. At least, I dare to trust him with my back." Hanjin said, "Among the children of Forza, I have carefully understood that you are the most suitable." "Why am I the most suitable?" Rinal's heart was itching. He wanted to know how Hanjin learned about his siblings and came to such a correct judgment. But he also knew that Hanjin would not tell him, so he did not ask. "Because you are smart enough, because you are fully mature, and because you are a qualified warrior." Rinal sighed. As the saying goes, 1,000 cups of wine are not enough for a bosom friend, but half a sentence is too much for a bosom friend. He suddenly felt that Hanjin was not as terrible as the rumors said. After a moment, Rinal said slowly, "Now, I believe in your sincerity, but I will not help you deal with my father. This, I think you can understand. Of course, I will never tell my father." "I can understand." Hanjin smiled and said, "In fact, I don't need you to do anything. I just need you to bring some words and some news to Forza." "What is it?" Rinal asked. The formal and harmonious conversation finally began. Rhinelander's expression kept changing. Sometimes he was surprised, and sometimes he was happy. He spoke and asked seriously, and no one knew what they were talking about. However, the few elves who were lying on the ground and didn't dare to move showed more and more fear on their faces. In the end, it turned into despair. After a long time, Hanjin laughed and said, "Of course, this credit belongs to you. You have completed what your father failed to do. Who else is more qualified than you?" Lionel stared at Hanjin with his eyes wide open. Suddenly, he pulled out his shiny scimitar again. With 2 flashes of the scimitar, the 2 elves were split into 2 halves before they could react. "No!" the other elf screamed, but his words were cut off by the flashes of Lionel's scimitar. "You still don't know him. This plan will not succeed." Rinal put his scimitar back into the scabbard and shook his head. "Why?" "Because, under normal circumstances, he will not do things that he is not sure of. If he is not sure, then let him be sure." Hanjin took out a crystal box from a space ring and handed it to Rinal. Rinal looked at Hanjin in surprise and took the crystal box. He was very curious. What could change Forza's decision? He opened the box and saw a simple magic scroll lying quietly in the box. When Lionel saw the markings on the side of the scroll, he recognized the human language and was immediately stunned. Is it enough? Yes. Of course it's enough. Reynolds smiled bitterly. It's just a pity. But don't worry, I know this does not belong to me. Haha, I will not be as greedy as him. Before the conversation, he did not really want to do it because he was afraid. He also did not think that Han Jin could win easily. But now, why not do it? It's good that it's enough, Han Jin said softly. I'm very curious. This kind of magic should have already. The treasures of civilization can't all disappear at once. They have to leave something behind for the future generations. Yes. Rinnell nodded, then suddenly remembered something. By the way, I have something to tell you. What is it? You and Sunir of the Elves have a good relationship, right? Yes. Han Jin raised his eyebrows. He knew what Rinnell meant by good relationship. You'd better go to Wild Willow City. Otherwise, you won't be able to see each other for the last time. Rinnell looked at Han Jin sympathetically. Because the movements of the elves are very vague, he is about to lose his patience. That's why he sent Great Shaman Yuridin to reinforce the Wild Willow City war zone. According to the schedule, they will arrive at Wild Willow City at dusk tomorrow. At this moment, Lionel was extremely sincere. He believed that Han Jin was his savior. Han Jin's sudden arrival had given him a ray of hope. Furthermore, Han Jin understood him, trusted him, and gave him a rare magic scroll without any agreement. This was a strong proof. Therefore, Lionel felt that he should repay Han Jin with something. Unfortunately, most of the things he could do would be meaningless to Han Jin. Only this piece of information was of some value. Han Jin was silent for a moment. Thank you. Don't mention it. We will become true partners, won't we? Rinnell laughed. Yes. Han Jin also laughed. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. Tell everyone to work harder. We will arrive at Wild Willow City soon. Blanche said to Trish. The long journey over the past few days had added a hint of exhaustion to her beautiful face. When Trish passed on Blanche's words, as Blanche expected, a clamor of complaints sounded in the group. Blanche smiled bitterly, but did not blame anyone. As the chief, she felt tired. It was no wonder that the warriors complained. A tribal chief walked up to Blanche and said with some dissatisfaction, Lady Blanche, I hope your guess is correct. Blanche looked at that tribal chief and said indifferently, Even if I'm wrong, I want to see the ancient tree of life. Another tribal chief sighed. Didn't the Senate just ally with them? At least for now, their goal is the same as ours. I really can't think of any reason why they would do this. I can't think of any reason either, Blanche replied. But why should I think about it? Blanche smiled. I only know that the war has already broken out. That's enough. It's the Senate's decision to ally with the orcs. It has nothing to do with me. Also, I never thought that the orcs would become our allies. What do you think? That tribal chief opened his mouth, but no words came out. That's right. Which elf would be willing to treat the orcs as their allies? Even if the Senate made this decision, it was probably because they wanted to use the orcs. Let's rest for a while before continuing. The warriors are already exhausted, the tribal chief said after walking side by side with Blanche for a while. Blanche turned to look at him and smiled. You're the one who's tired, aren't you? That tribal chief's face flushed red. Aren't you tired? Even we can't take it. How long do you think the ordinary warriors can last? Blanche stopped and looked at the tribal chief seriously. Are our warriors that weak? At this moment, another tribal chief quickly came up to smooth things over. Blanche, you know that's not what he meant. Actually, it's not a big deal to rest for a while, right? Look, we haven't even seen a shadow of an orc on the way. Maybe that human lord was just spouting nonsense. What do you think our chances of survival are if we encounter an orc army in the wild? Blanche threw down this sentence and walked forward without looking back. The other clan leaders didn't say anything. They looked at each other and shook their heads at the same time. Then they started walking as well. Since they already believed Blanche, it was better to obey her orders. The elves were the undisputed kings of the forest, but their fighting ability in the wild was lacking. After all, not every elven tribe had a silver Pegasus. As dusk approached, the elves led by Blanche finally saw the towering silhouette of Wild Willow City. The stone in Blanche's heart finally fell to the ground. As long as they could enter Wild Willow City, it meant that they were safe. Wild Willow City's defensive capabilities were unquestionable. The elves, who were busy repairing Wild Willow City's walls, noticed the large group of elves approaching from afar. They quickly put down the work in their hands and hid behind the vines while ringing the alarm. Sharp arrows shot out from the gaps between the vines. The closer they got to Wild Willow City, the more Blanche felt that something was wrong. The ground was covered in beast footprints. After dealing with the orcs for so many years, Blanche could easily tell that these were the footprints left by the Gale Wolves. There was an astonishingly large pit in the wilderness, and a thick smell of blood wafted out. Blanche couldn't help but frown as she looked at the dark red soil in the pit. She was even more certain that a battle had taken place here. Hearing the alarm, Sunir and Athena quickly rushed to the top of the city wall. When they saw that it wasn't orcs, but a large group of elves, they both let out a sigh of relief. The damaged walls hadn't been repaired yet, and couldn't take more than a few rounds of attacks. After entering the city, Blanche and the others were shocked to find that there were only 1,000 or so elven warriors left in this huge city. Where did the rest go? Did they all die in the battle outside the city? We're not stupid. Why would we go out of the city and fight against the orc army? Sunir said with a smile when she heard Blanche's question. Army. The orcs attacked Wild Willow City. It's not just an attack. They almost took down Wild Willow City, Athena said with a bitter smile. She then said to the elven guards beside her, Tell them to hurry up. The orcs are only retreating temporarily. Who knows when they'll appear again? The elves on the city wall began to get busy again. The vines covering the walls parted like curtains, revealing the mottled walls underneath. Hill giants? Blanche asked with a frown. Iron smithing had always been the beastmen's weakness, so they couldn't make any decent siege weapons. There was only one possibility for the stone walls to be damaged to such an extent. Yes, Sunir nodded. How many? Blanche asked. About a dozen, Sunir replied. What? Blanche sucked in a breath of cold air. She felt like she had to re-evaluate the defensive capabilities of Wild Willow City. After all, the hill giants were natural throwers. Their accuracy was not inferior to the elves, and their range was longer than the elves, so their power was also greater. The fact that the city wall could withstand the attacks of a dozen hill giants gave Blanche a deep understanding of the power of the ancient Tree of Life in Wild Willow City. It was incomparable to the ancient Tree of Life in other places. But it's fine now. Those hill giants have been taken care of by Sunir, Athena said proudly. She still couldn't forget that earth-shattering arrow. Blanche and the tribal leaders beside her all turned their heads and looked at Sunir, their eyes filled with shock. Sunir saw the gazes of Blanche and the others and gently pursed her lips. It's all in the past. What's the point of bringing it up? Sister Blanche, I'm really happy to see you. I've heard Raphael talk about you before. Hearing the name Raphael, everyone's face became a little awkward. Blanche and the tribal leaders didn't need to be mentioned. Without Han Jin's reminder, they probably wouldn't have known what was going on until the orcs arrived. What was even more laughable was that the one who reminded them was the target of the elven army. The elves of Wild Willow City, led by Athena, knew very well what kind of decision the Senate had made, and the truth behind that ridiculous wedding. What's wrong with you guys? Sunir felt that the atmosphere was a little strange. Blanche really didn't know what to say, so she could only try her best to change the topic. Too many things have happened recently. Sunir, we didn't come all the way here just to stand here, did we? Seeing that Blanche didn't want to talk about it, Sunir didn't pursue the matter. She smiled faintly and said, Of course not. I'll have someone take you to rest. Seeing the backs of Blanche and the others leave, the smile on Sunir's face slowly disappeared. She thought about how everyone around her had been avoiding her ever since she came out of the illusion. Sunir faintly had a bad premonition in her heart. I'll go help arrange it. Athena didn't dare to look at Sunir's expression. She reluctantly found an excuse and ran away as if she were escaping. In the residence provided by Wild Willow City, Blanche and the tribal leaders sat together in a circle. The Senate's decision this time was really too hasty, a tribal leader said with a sigh. That's right. I don't know which damned bastard came up with this idea. Everyone on the continent knows what kind of people the orcs are. Isn't allying with them suicidal? That's right. It's all thanks to that human lord this time. I really don't know why we have to go against him. The tribal leaders spoke one after another. The elves were a race that clearly distinguished between kindness and hatred. These tribal leaders couldn't bring up the slightest bit of hatred for Han Jin, who had indirectly saved them. Although Han Jin's hands were stained with elven blood, they were still the ones who had invaded the orcs first, weren't they? And they had even taken advantage of Han Jin's absence. I'm not worried about the orcs, Blanche said in a low voice. Then what are you worried about? Blanche raised her head and looked at the tribal leaders around her. Do you really not know why Raphael did what he did? We started the war first. He should be the happiest one when the orcs fought with us. The tribal leaders all fell silent. They couldn't think of an answer, no matter how hard they racked their brains. Could it be that Raphael doesn't have any good feelings towards the orcs? So he can't bear to see us get killed by the orcs? A tribal leader asked. Blanche thought carefully and said, that should be one of the reasons. After all, the orcs don't have a good reputation. Of course, the tribal leader who spoke had a proud expression. Compared to the orcs, we're much better. How so? Blanche sneered. Is that really so? Look at how we dealt with that human lord. I won't say anything about the fake wedding. After all, it was to boost morale. But using a fake souvenir to trick Raphael into the encirclement, is that even considered honorable? The tribal leaders opened their mouths, but no words came out. Bang! The door was pushed open, and Athena came in. Who came up with this idea? Athena's face was covered with a layer of frost. She had been in charge of guarding Wild Willow City and didn't know what happened at the front lines. The failure of Prudence's plan wasn't a good thing, so of course, she wouldn't spread the news. Who else? Blanche sighed. Of course it's our allied army's commander, Prudence. Damn it! Athena cursed in her heart. As a member of Lydia's faction, she didn't have a good impression of the radical faction led by Prudence and the Great Elder. If this happened to other elves, Athena wouldn't be so angry. It's none of our business, and we shouldn't care about it. This was not only the creed of some humans, but the elves were no exception as well. But the key point was that Sunir was Gao Bin's sister. For so many years, Lydia's heart had been with Gao Bin. As her subordinates, they all knew very well that Sunir was Gao Bin's sister. The Great Elder had forced Sunir to accept Prudence from the south, causing Sunir to force her way into the illusion. They didn't expect that they would use Sunir's name as bait to lure the human lord into a trap. They couldn't imagine what kind of reaction Sunir would have once she heard the news. And then what happened? Athena asked bitterly. And then? And then the Dragon City Elder we spent a lot of money to invite was killed by Raphael. Blanche said grumpily. Athena was taken aback. There was even an Elder of Dragon City involved. What was even more shocking was that Raphael could still kill an Elder of Dragon City, even after falling into a trap. How high did he need to be to do that? That human lord was truly worthy of the title of Dragon Slayer. What about that Prudence? Athena thought maliciously. It would have been best if he had been killed by Raphael as well. If he hadn't come here to stir up trouble, perhaps none of this would have happened. It said that when our commander escaped, he was naked and covered in blood. Blanche curled her lips. First, she didn't think that the elves would win this war, and then she was pushed aside. She didn't have a good impression of Prudence at all. Right. How did that Sunir kill a dozen mountain giants? A tribal leader asked. The others also became spirited. Everyone present wanted to know the answer. After all, those were mountain giants. No matter how stupid the orcs were, they knew that they should protect powerful units like the shamans and mountain giants. One arrow. Athena looked at the suspicious eyes around her and emphasized, only one arrow. The room suddenly became silent. Killing a dozen mountain giants with one arrow. There was no doubt that the arrow was enchanted with magic. But the question was, how powerful did the magic have to be to do that? And then Sunir killed all those mountain giants? How did she do it? That's right, it was just one arrow. That crater outside the city was her masterpiece. Those mountain giants weren't the only ones who died. Those beastmen who formed the human wall were also killed. Not even their corpses were left. I don't know how she did it. Athena spread out her hands, but I'm sure that Sunir didn't have this kind of strength before. The tribal leaders all fell into deep thought. Wild Willow City's Senate already had an important position in the Elven Alliance. Sharpshooter Gal Bin's return added weight to Wild Willow City's position. With Sunir's sudden appearance, no one would be able to shake Wild Willow City's leadership position. No one would not think for themselves. Being able to join the decision-making team meant that they could fight for more benefits for their tribe. But now, it was clear that other than Blanche, none of the elves who came from afar had the qualifications. Everyone was well aware that the reason Blanche was valued by the Senate was because of the only mist flower in her possession. Blanche, what did you say you were worried about? A tribal leader couldn't stand the heavy atmosphere in the room and tried to change the topic. I'm worried about. Blanche looked around at everyone. Chapter 388. Stop. A clear voice came from the darkness, and the voice became hesitant. You are a human? Hanjin stopped and said softly, Is the great elf Lydia here? Inform her that an old friend is looking for her. It was already the latter half of the night, and the orc army was still chasing after the elves, so the distance between the two camps was only about 60 miles. However, Hanjin spent a lot of time convincing Lionel, and he did not waste any time at all. He immediately rushed over after bidding farewell to Lionel. Who are you? A dozen or so elves emerged from the shadows formed by the vines in front of them, and the elf in the lead asked, You don't need to know who I am. Lydia will know. You think anyone can see Lady Lydia just because they want to? The elf felt that Hanjin was being too arrogant and was a little displeased. At this moment, another elf came over and whispered something into the leader's ear. The leader's expression changed, and his tone changed as well. Before Hanjin could answer, he said hurriedly, Please wait here for a moment. I will inform Lady Lydia immediately. Okay, thank you. Hanjin nodded. The leader led half of the elves and hurriedly left, leaving the remaining 6 or 7 elves at a loss. They had already figured out the identity of the human in front of them, and while they were fearful, they also had some expectations, hoping that this human lord would bring them good news. Through Julia and Constance's preaching, word had spread from 1 to 10, and 10 to 100, and by now, many elves knew that Hanjin was kind to the elves. Not long after, Lydia strode out from the camp, and the elves who went back to report were all behind her. Seeing Hanjin from afar, Lydia did not look surprised and only smiled. What is so important that you have to come here personally? Where's Constance? Didn't she come back with you? I'm here to talk to you about the release of the elven prisoners of war. Hanjin replied slowly, and then looked around. You can all leave. Lydia understood and turned her head to give the order. She then turned her eyes back to Hanjin and asked in a low voice, Who exactly are you? There's something I need to talk to Goblins about. Huh? After hearing Hanjin's words, Lydia could not help but laugh. In fact, he has always wanted to see you. Come with me to avoid alerting the Senate. We can only go in quietly. I hope you don't mind. It's okay. Hanjin looked indifferent, but when Lydia walked in front of him, he looked at Lydia's back. There was no other reason. Lydia didn't seem to be on guard against him. He didn't understand where this trust came from. Because of the sky, the camp was very quiet, and only a few elves could be seen hurriedly walking past. The stress of war was obvious on their faces, and there was almost no smile. This was easy to understand. Only the victors had the right to smile. Compared to the scene when they attacked the Bite Man, this was a stark contrast. The journey was a little longer, and Lydia seemed to have purposely taken a detour, either to avoid something or to buy time for someone. After walking for about half an hour, she stopped and pointed at the tent in front of her. There, he hasn't rested yet. These days, he's been like this. Lydia's expression was a little melancholy. Don't need to inform him? Hanjin saw Lydia walking over and was about to lift the curtain. No need. Don't be polite with this guy. The more polite you are, the more he will look down on you. Lydia smiled. Lydia, who are you talking bad about me to again? A voice came from inside. Come in. Lydia shook her head, lifted the curtain, and walked in. Hanjin had no choice but to follow the host into the tent. At first glance, he saw a big man with a full beard sitting on a tree stump. His gaze only lingered on the big man for a moment before looking elsewhere. He was looking for goblins, but the tent was very small. It took him at most a second to look around. Other than the big man, there was no one else in the tent. Hanjin couldn't help but look back. It was only then that he noticed the big man had a pair of pointy ears. He was stunned. You're goblins? Hanjin usually wouldn't make the mistake of judging a person by their appearance. The problem was that Gobbins was Sunir's biological brother. Besides, Galbin was also a handsome man. Although he wasn't as handsome as Prudence, he was still very famous. The elves were very good at dressing up. He had seen tens of thousands of elves, but he had never seen an elf with a beard. The elves in the captive camp were poor enough that they didn't even have basic freedom, but their chins were still smooth. He couldn't accept Gobbins' appearance. You are. Gobbins was also a little surprised. He didn't expect Lydia to bring a human here. Raphael? It's me. It's me. Hanjin and Gobbins replied in unison. Lydia smiled and carefully brushed another stump. Sit down. You two sit and talk. Hanjin didn't refuse. He walked over and slowly sat down on the stump. The atmosphere suddenly became a little awkward. It was an indescribable feeling. In terms of status, one was the lord of the Holy Crown City, and the other was the military commander of the elves. When they sat together, the topic must be formal and serious. Moreover, Gobbins was very good at talking. He scolded a group of elders, and even Updura left with hatred, which was enough to prove his power. Gobbins had also thought about what to talk about when he met Hanjin. However, when he really saw Hanjin, he suddenly became silent. Hanjin came prepared, but he was keenly aware of Gobbins' abnormality. The reason for this abnormality was self-evident. Therefore, he also felt a little embarrassed. If Gobbins chatted with him about something else or went straight to the point, he could handle it easily. But now, he didn't know what to say. One was Sunir's brother, and the other was the man that Sunir was willing to entrust her life to. The two strangers should have become real relatives under the bond of Sunir. But because of various reasons, they didn't know how to define themselves and each other. If they only talked about important things, it would hurt the vague affection between them. Talking about personal things? Hanjin and Gobbins both had a guilty conscience. From Hanjin's point of view, Sunir was completely innocent. How could he recognize her as his family? From Gobbins' point of view, the elves first occupied Hanjin territory and then created a fake Sunir to lure Hanjin into a dead end. They had done everything thoroughly. Now that the elves were facing a crisis, he wanted to build a relationship with Hanjin? That was too shameless. Gobbins, what's wrong with you? Lydia felt strange. Why aren't you talking? Huh? Gobbins smiled and touched his chin. Do you drink? Hanjin didn't expect Gobbins to ask such a question. He was stunned and nodded. Yes. Good. Gobbins said with force. Gobbins, what do you mean? Those who don't drink are not good people? Lydia laughed. Out of the two elves in the tent, Lydia was the most relaxed. Does that mean that the higher the alcohol tolerance, the better the person? I didn't say that. Gobbins didn't know Hanjin's alcohol tolerance, so of course, he wanted to avoid anything that would make Hanjin uncomfortable. He turned around and looked around. His tent was very simple, and there was no wine at all. He could only say to Lydia, Lydia, help me get some wine. All right, I'll leave you to it. Lydia smiled and walked out of the tent. About 10 minutes later, Lydia came back with a tray of wine. She listened outside the tent for a while and was surprised to see that no one was talking. She quickly opened the tent curtain and saw Hanjin and Gobbins still sitting opposite each other on the tree stump. What are you two doing? Lydia asked. Nothing. Gobbins laughed dryly. We're waiting for you to bring the wine. Have you two become mimosas? Lydia didn't know whether to laugh or cry. She put down the tray heavily. Can't you talk without wine? Galbin coughed a few times, pretending that he hadn't heard Lydia's words. He put down the glass and picked up the jug. But when he had just poured a little for Hanjin, He hurriedly picked up the jug and said discontentedly, I don't want this wine. God, I don't know how you got that bad habit. We don't have the kind of bad wine you like. Lydia said helplessly. Besides, Raphael is a guest. Do you think he'll be like you? In work, she was Gobbins' assistant and would definitely cooperate with Gobbins. But in real life, they were friends who could talk about anything. So her tone was very natural and not polite. What do you know? Wine must be strong enough. After drinking a mouthful, you can feel a flame spurting out from your chest. That's how it tastes. Gobbins laughed. Raphael, don't you think so? I'm not picky. Any kind of wine is fine. Han Jin smiled. Galbin became a mute again, while Lydia giggled. Logically speaking, Lydia was ugly with half of her face destroyed, but when she giggled, she exuded a kind of feminine charm, which made Han Jin lose himself in her beauty. The point is, who am I drinking with? Han Jin continued faintly. When I'm with some people, even if there's 100-year-old wine in front of me, it won't arouse my interest. But when I'm with some people, even if I'm drinking water, it will still make me feel strong. Gobbins was pouring wine for Han Jin. He suddenly stopped and slowly raised his head. Interesting. So, do I belong to the former or the latter? If you were the former, I wouldn't have come. Even if I came, I wouldn't have come looking for you. Galbin laughed loudly. His laughter was wild and hearty. Then he filled his cup to the brim and drained it in one gulp. Then he said seriously, let's talk business. Okay. Han Jin also raised his glass and drank it. He let out a long sigh of relief. It could even be said that he was relieved of a heavy burden. They finally talked about business. This half an hour was really hard to bear. Moreover, he was very anxious. According to Reynolds' information, the Beastman's reinforcements would arrive at Wild Willow City tomorrow. No, at dusk today. He had to rush over, so he had to negotiate with Gobbins as soon as possible. I say, brother. Gobbins suddenly stopped. He deliberately took the opportunity to observe Han Jin's expression. He saw Han Jin's eyelids suddenly twitch. He couldn't help but feel a chill in his heart, but he quickly adjusted his emotions and smiled. Lord Raphael, please don't mind me. Because I've been in the human world for too long, I've been infected with some habits. If this title is offensive, no. Han Jin's tone was a little strained. I like it. At least it makes me feel very comfortable. It's good that you don't mind. Gobbins stared at the glass in his hand. No one knew what he was thinking. Then he laughed. I'm older than you, so then I'll call you Big Brother, Han Jin said softly. Gobbins was completely stunned this time. He stared at Han Jin without blinking. Lydia also faintly understood what this Big Brother meant. Although Gobbins' age was for this purpose, Han Jin rushed to agree. This was enough to prove his sincerity and goodwill. Okay. After a while, Gobbins took a deep breath and smiled. Then I won't be unreasonable. Brother, when can you help me? To be honest, I can't hold on much longer. Can't hold on much longer? It doesn't seem that serious, right? Han Jin wanted to laugh. He didn't expect Gobbins to be so straightforward. Gobbins was the current military commander of the elves. Even if he wanted to prove his ability, he had to use some ambiguous words so that others wouldn't mistakenly think that he was too incompetent. The situation seems to be okay now, but because Forza's ambition is too big, he wants to eat all the elves in one go. When he finds out that this wish is unrealistic, Gobbins paused. The day Forza changes his plan is the day I can't hold on anymore. Forza is nothing, Han Jin said slowly. The reason why I haven't moved is because of you. Us. Gobbins asked seriously. I can stretch out my hand, but I want to know whose hand I will hold. You or Ampugula. What if it's Ampugula? Gobbins asked softly. You shouldn't ask, because you know what I will do. Han Jin smiled. The main problem of the elves is still within you. If this problem can't be solved, I can't trust you. Half a year ago, you suddenly invaded my territory without any reason. How do I know that there won't be a second time? As long as I'm alive, there will never be a second time. Gobbins said firmly. You can use this reason to convince me, but you can't convince my army and generals, Han Jin said slowly. And your promise itself has changed. You're still alive? What if you can't defeat them? I know what you mean. I've thought about it. Gobbins' tone became difficult. And then he said very seriously, "But I can't do that. I really can't." "I know you can't, so let me help you. You want to deal with Ampugula and Prudence." Gobbins was stunned. "No, that won't be good for our cooperation." Han Jin shook his head. "Right now, Ampugula's prestige has been greatly damaged. They can only rely on others' sympathy to protect their position. Prudence's situation is even worse. He has been stripped of all his commanding power. What do you think they need the most?" "You mean a victory, a glorious victory that will allow them to become arrogant again?" Han Jin smiled. "I'm here today to discuss with you how to give this victory to them." Gobbins was silent for a long time. Then he said word by word, "What do you want to do?" Han Jin slowly explained while Gobbins and Lydia listened attentively. After about 20 minutes, Han Jin explained everything that Gobbins should do in detail. He knew that some things couldn't be hidden from Gobbins, so he was very honest. Gobbins and Lydia's expressions kept changing. They remained silent until Han Jin finished. "You thought of this yourself?" Gobbins whispered. "Yes." Han Jin smiled. "You should understand my sincerity now. If this leaks out, I'll be in a very bad situation." "I agree with your plan," Lydia suddenly said. Gobbins couldn't help but raise his head and look at Lydia with an amused gaze. "What are you looking at?" Lydia rolled her eyes at Gobbins. "Even if you object, I'll still follow Raphael's plan." "Lydia, in your eyes, am I the kind of silly boy who doesn't dare to do anything?" Gobbins asked helplessly. "I've already suggested it many times." Chapter 389. On the eastern city wall of Wild Willow City, a group of elves was gathered together. They were watching the afterglow of the setting sun and enjoying a rare moment of peace and quiet. Along the way, Blanche had gathered many elves who had been scattered. Therefore, most of the elves knew that the outside world had become very chaotic. The beastmen had raised their butcher's knife and killed tens of thousands of their companions. However, there was nothing they could do. The most they could do was condemn and curse. There was also a female elf humming a melancholy tune. Together with the current situation and the perilous situation, it felt like the sun was setting. "The beastmen are here again," an elf in charge of sentry duty shouted. Those elves stood up one after another and looked outside. In the distance, a black line was rolling towards them. The enemy's speed was very fast. It would take them at most half an hour to reach Wild Willow City. Below the alarm, the elf in the lead said slowly, "Good." An elf forced a smile. "Let Lady Sunir teach them a lesson. The beastmen already know how powerful Lady Sunir is. They've only been quiet for a few days, and now they're sending an army again. It's not as simple as you think." The elf in the lead shook his head. In the continuous bloody battles, their military discipline had also improved considerably. When the alarm sounded, almost all of the elves immediately sprang into action. Sunir quickly arrived on the city wall. Her long golden hair, fluttering in the wind, had become the battle flag in the hearts of the elves. No matter how fierce the enemy was, as long as they could see Sunir's figure, their hearts would be filled with fighting spirit. Moreover, Blanche had brought the reinforcements they had been dreaming of. There were about 7,000 elves in the city now. Of course, this number was still very small, but it was much better than before. Athena and Blanche also rushed to the east side of the city. They were in a hurry. Just as they were about to step on the stairs, Blanche suddenly exclaimed in surprise and turned to look in a certain direction. However, she didn't find what she was looking for, so she looked around again. "What's wrong?" Athena hurriedly asked. I think I saw a familiar face." Blanche shook her head with a bitter smile. "My eyes must be playing tricks on me. How could he be here? Who are you talking about?" Athena was very curious. "Forget it. Let's go up." Blanche did not want to answer. Athena didn't continue to ask. The two of them quickly climbed up the city wall and stood beside Sunir. Looking at the approaching beastmen army, Athena slowly said, "My lady, you should rest for a while. It's already late. The beastmen army must rest for the night before launching the attack tomorrow." "No, let's wait and see," Sunir said softly. Sunir's eyesight had become very sharp. She could even catch the appearance of the beastmen a few miles away. In the past, the beastmen warriors would only reveal expressions of lust or hatred. But now, she could see undisguised contempt in the eyes of the beastmen warriors. Sunir knew very well what kind of damage she had done to the beastmen in the past few days. She had also proven her strength with her actions. Contempt for the enemy often came from confidence in oneself. The beastmen still dared to come, and they came full of confidence. The meaning behind this was self-evident. Thinking of this, Sunir felt her heart sink. Why are the beastmen coming again? I even suspect that they are using Lady Sunir to eliminate the dissidents. An elf leader laughed. It's different this time. Sunir sighed. Prepare for battle. Prepare for battle? Athena was surprised. Then she saw that the beastmen army's vanguard had already crossed the safe distance and were approaching Wild Willow City. Athena couldn't help but take a deep breath. Are they crazy? They've come so far, and they're not resting at all. They want to attack the city immediately? We have to fight one way or another. It doesn't matter if it's now or tomorrow. Sunir frowned slightly. Lady Sunir, there's something. I don't know if I should say it or not. Blanche said with a hesitant expression. Say it. Sunir turned her head and looked at Blanche. I have some human friends. You mean Raphael? No. I'm talking about some friends who escaped with me from the southwest region. Blanche finally made up her mind. Looking at the relationship between Sunir and Hanjin, she chose to believe Sunir. She shouldn't be wrong. I didn't mean to hide it. Ever since I came here, the elves have already started a war. Ahem. Athena hurriedly coughed. Blanche was stunned for a moment before she realized that Sunir didn't know that the elves had declared war on Hanjin. Are you mistaken? Sunir looked at Blanche suspiciously before looking at Athena. Didn't the beastman attack us first? Are you hiding something from me? No, lady. Athena hurriedly said. No. Sunir was silent for a moment before her tone gradually turned cold. Blanche said that we've already started a war. Who did you declare war on? At this moment, a mournful horn sounded from the beastman's formation. Blanche hurriedly said, Lady, the past. I'll talk to you in detail in the future. The key is how we're going to beat back the beastman's attack. Athena's expression was bitter as she looked at Blanche from behind Sunir. Her meaning was obvious. Do you really want to say it? Blanche's smile had a hint of helplessness. She could hide it for a day or a month, but could she hide it for a lifetime? Sunir had to know sooner or later. All right. Sunir nodded. What did you want to say? Among my friends, there's a magus called Panvin Magus? That's great. Athena couldn't help but laugh in surprise. But what I value more is not his magic, but his ability, Blanche said with a serious expression. Blanche said seriously, I'm from the Southwest District, and I used to be good friends with half-elf Lola. How should I put it? Although Lola lost to Nicholas in the end, it wasn't her fault. Nicholas was too scary. I know that, Sunir slowly said. Raphael has talked to me about Nicholas more than once. Lola is an outstanding hero. She possesses extraordinary wisdom, upholds justice, and has a strong personality. If you can get to know her, you will respect her as much as I do. At this point, Blanche showed a sad expression. Panwin is Lola's most trusted aide. Lola's alliance has stopped Nicholas's invasion several times, and Panvin has participated in almost all of them. I think his ability in this aspect is far better than ours. Then what are you waiting for? Invite him out, Athena said anxiously. She didn't understand why Blanche was still saying that it was useless when the beastmen were getting closer. He won't come out even if I invite him out, Blanche said with a bitter smile. It's because at that time, the elves were hostile to humans. I was worried that Panvin and the others would be hurt, so I had to put them under house arrest. Hostile to humans? Sunir slowly asked. When did this happen? Blanche was speechless. Lying was a skill, and it was easy to make up a lie. But the difficult part was that one had to use more lies to prove the truth of the first lie, and the subsequent lies also needed to be proven. If one was careless, they would give themselves away. Blanche was already very careful, But there were too many things that needed to be taken care of, and eventually a flaw appeared. "Forget it, I won't ask." Sunir moved her eyes away and said in a low voice, "When we get through this, you have to tell me everything." "Okay." Blanche smiled bitterly. "You mean he won't come out to help us?" "He will, but I can't go." Blanche said, "Lady Sunir, it's best if you can go in person." "Why?" Sunir was stunned. "Because you are Raphael's lover." Blanche didn't say that Hanjin was able to kill Maxwell. This kind of strength was unparalleled. If there was only one person on the continent who could deal with Nicholas, it would be Hanjin. Hanjin and Nicholas had a lot in common. They both stood out at a young age and established their own forces. However, when Nicholas was in his early 20s, his strength definitely couldn't compare to the current Hanjin. Of course, Nicholas's forces were much stronger than Hanjin's. It could also be said that Nicholas had the advantage of being the first mover, and Hanjin's future was more malleable. Sunir shook her head slightly. "It's too late. Athena, you go in my place." The orc army was getting closer and closer. The elf could clearly see thousands of thunderbirds circling in the sky. Because the elves also had powerful long-range attacks, the flock of thunderbirds maintained a relatively high altitude. Walking in the middle of the orc army were more than 100 tall mountain giants. There were also more than 3,000 orc warriors riding on gale wolves guarding the flanks and front of the army. The orc army was a little strange. In the past, the orc army was mainly made up of infantry, and the gale wolf warriors only made up a small part of it. Furthermore, the gale wolf warriors weren't supposed to be the ones guarding the flanks. Their job was to seize the opportunity to tear apart the enemy's defensive line. The rest were supplemented by shamans, mountain giants, and behemoths. However, there wasn't a single infantry among the orcs. Even the weakest of them was a gale wolf warrior, and it was a large group of warriors armed to the teeth. Every warrior was wearing heavy armor. Even the gale wolves they were riding had specially made armor that covered the entire wolf tightly. Only pairs of glowing green eyes, for sharp claws, and a heavy tail could be seen. If the gale wolves were so well protected, there was no need to talk about the warriors riding them. What surprised the elves even more was that they could feel the magic waves. It wasn't very strong, but it was very widespread and mixed. This proved that many orc warriors were wearing magic armor. In addition, there were too many mountain giants and shamans. In the past, an orc army with about 10,000 people would have a dozen mountain giants and 100 shamans. However, the number of mountain giants and shamans in front of them was close to 1/3 of the gale wolf warriors. The total strength of this orc army was far less than the previous batches, but every elf could see that this was definitely a veteran army, the best of the best. They couldn't understand. What was going on? Did Forza send his own royal guards? About 1,000 meters away from Wild Willow City, the orc army finally stopped. A gale wolf warrior suddenly broke away from the main group and quickly ran towards Wild Willow City. Many elves pulled their longbows and aimed at the gale wolf warrior from afar. However, without Sunir's order, they certainly wouldn't attack randomly. The gale wolf warrior ran all the way to the bottom of the city. Now, all the elves could clearly see what the orc armor looked like. It was simply wrapped in a layer of iron shell. If it weren't for the tusks, they would probably be wearing a helmet. Many elves had laughed at the orcs for being poor and barbaric, but compared to the orcs in front of them, most of the elves in the city felt inferior. What's that? A few sharp-eyed elves noticed that there seemed to be something tied behind the orc warrior. Our commander asked me to bring you a message. The orc warrior roared insolently, then jumped down from the gale wolf. Only then did Blanche and Athena see that there was an elf tied up behind the gale wolf. The orc warrior pulled the elf down, and as he untied the rope, he kicked the elf to the ground. The orc warrior raised his head and glanced at the city wall with contempt. Then he suddenly pulled out his curved sword and slashed down. Blood splashed, and the elf's head flew more than 10 meters away. The headless corpse fell softly to the ground. The moon will rise in 2 hours. The orc warrior laughed loudly. Huh, As long as you can defend Wild Willow City before the moonlight shines here, we will immediately withdraw our troops. Do you understand? The elves were in an uproar. They couldn't bear to see their comrade being killed in front of their eyes. Countless elves wanted to shoot the arrows in their hands, but in the end, they slowly let go of their hands. Pairs of eyes focused on Sunir, waiting for her orders. When Lydia asked Athena to guard Wild Willow City, except for a few hundred elven archers who were relatively strong, most of the elves were not elite. Otherwise, they would have already followed the army to battle. However, all intelligent beings would gradually grow with experience, and the elves were no exception. They had gone through too many trials these days, and their military skills were also honed, so they still controlled themselves. Of course, Sunir had also played a decisive role. She had won the respect of all the elves with her unquestionable strength. If it had been Athena who was in charge of the whole situation, the situation might not have been under control, even if she had shouted, "Don't shoot," in time. Bastard! Blanche was so angry that her face turned green. Did you hear that? Say something. The orc shouted. You must work hard, and don't let us down. Ha ha! My lady, this is a trap. They want us to exhaust all our combat power in a short period of time. Athena hurriedly said. A trap? Sunir snorted coldly, then took out her longbow and aimed at the orc warrior. The orc warrior also saw Sunir's action. He estimated that he might be in danger, so he immediately took out the round shield from the back of the storm wolf and blocked in front of himself, and slowly backed away. This reaction was normal, but normal didn't mean correct. If he continued to maintain his arrogant posture, with his chest out and head up, without any resistance, and prepare to take Sunir's arrow, it was really unknown whether this arrow would be shot. Are you ready? Sunir's clear voice spread far and wide in the yellow plains. The orc warrior let out a low snort, bent down behind the round shield, and slowly backed away. Sunir let go of her hand, and a black light shot out like lightning. The black light hit the edge of the round shield and disappeared in a flash. The orc warrior seemed to have been hit hard, and his body involuntarily spun about 3 or 4 times before falling to the ground. Sunir didn't take his life. The arrow pierced through the round shield and shot into his right upper arm. The fierce force tore off his entire right arm, and an arm and a curved sword were thrown far away. The orc warrior's broken arm was bleeding like a fountain, but he also showed his wildness. He actually got up bit by bit and laughed loudly at Wild Willow City. However, the trembling laughter was very unpleasant, like a ghost crying. Such powerful archery. Ha! Ha! Sunir pulled out a second arrow and shot it out. The arrow pierced through the afterglow of the setting sun and hit the curved sword. It was unknown if the quality of the curved sword was too low or if Sunir's strength was too great, but the arrow easily pierced through the blade and nailed into the ground. The orc warrior's face changed. He thought that the arrow had missed, and he was lucky enough to save his life. However, he was seriously injured and couldn't escape from the attack range of the elves. He decided to go all out and ridicule his opponent's archery skills, but in the end, it turned out that she didn't want to kill him at all. Go back and tell your commander, Sunir said coldly. No matter how long it takes, as long as you can get this curved sword back, I will immediately give Wild Willow City to you. The elves who saw this scene were silent for a moment, and then suddenly let out an earth-shattering cheer. This was too satisfying, too exciting. Even Athena was a bit excited. She was the commander, so of course she knew the meaning of those 2 arrows. In war, this kind of agreement was very childish and ridiculous, because no one would agree to this kind of agreement without any binding force. However, they had to respond, or else it would cause a hidden damage to the morale of the elves. Even if they killed the other party on the spot, it wouldn't be able to recover. And Sunir's response was just right. Aren't you crazy? I'm even crazier than you. Sunir was really becoming more and more decisive as a leader. Athena couldn't help but think of Galbin when he was young. Yes, they were all becoming mature bit by bit. Chapter 390. Along with the sound of the horn, The storm wolf warriors parted to the sides. More than 100 tall mountain giants lined up in a row, like a wave that was almost 1,000 meters long. Each of them held a round, polished stone in their hands. Sunir felt that something was wrong, but she couldn't tell what was wrong. She could only continue to observe in silence. The mountain giants stopped about 800 meters away from Wild Willow City. At this distance, only Sunir, Athena, and a few other elves could deal damage to the enemy. Since the enemy's intentions were still unknown, they didn't want to waste their energy. The sound of the beastman's horn suddenly changed. The row of mountain giants began to charge forward at the same time. They were tall and had large strides. In the blink of an eye, they were already 50 to 60 meters away. Using the momentum, they threw the stones in their hands. Boulders flew through the air in heavy and ferocious trajectories, falling towards Wild Willow City. The elves were already used to this kind of scene, so their expressions were very relaxed. They estimated the landing point of the boulders and began to evade them. Clusters of dense vines grew out of the ground, covering the city wall layer after layer to reduce the damage caused by the boulders. At this moment, a shocking scene appeared. Most of the huge stones exploded into pieces of various sizes before they even hit the ground. Then a black shadow rolled down from the side. Some elves were hit by the stones that suddenly exploded and bled. Before they could regain their senses, they suddenly saw an ugly and ferocious face under them. Then, a bright light from a sword covered everything. There was a stark contrast between those black shadows and the Gale Wolf warriors outside the city. Most of the Gale Wolf warriors were around 8 to 1, 9 meters tall. They had the backs of tigers and the waists of bears, and they looked very sturdy. Those black shadows, on the other hand, were only 4 to 1, 5 meters tall. They looked very short and small. Not to mention the Gale Wolf warriors. They were even much smaller than the elves. The Gale Wolf warriors were known for their strength and ferocity. It was hard to tell how strong those black shadows were, but their movement speed was extremely fast. They were like a group of fleeting ghosts mixed in with the elves. The moment these black shadows landed, the ancient tree of life, which had been activated a long time ago, reacted immediately. Vines with sharp barbs drilled out from the ground and rolled towards the black shadows. The black shadows relied on their high speed to avoid getting entangled with living plants. They weaved in and out of the crowd of elves. Every time a sword flashed, an elf would fall into a pool of blood. Bloodthirsty warriors. It's the great shaman Uridin. Blanche screamed. Just as Sunir was about to say something, she suddenly felt a sense of danger. From the corner of her eyes, she saw thousands of thunderbirds quietly swooping down from the sky. It was too late to say anything. Sunir roared angrily and pushed Athena and Blanche away with her arms. She also jumped off the city wall. If Sunir's reaction had been half a second slower, the consequences would have been unimaginable. The moment she jumped off the city wall, countless bolts of lightning had already poured down from the sky and gathered at the spot where she stood, forming a semicircular ball of light about 7 or 8 meters in diameter. Then, with a loud bang, the explosion sent smoke and debris dozens of meters into the air. The closest elves were swallowed by the lightning and disappeared without a trace. The dozens of elves further away were also sent flying. Some were badly mutilated, some had their limbs torn apart, and the nearby vines were swept away, revealing the damaged city wall. At the center of the explosion, there was a black hole that was several meters deep. Cracks extended outwards, and the widest crack was almost a foot wide. If the same attack were to happen again, this part of the city wall would probably collapse on the spot. Blanche and Athena's strength was not bad. They adjusted their bodies by rolling and landed steadily on the ground. However, their faces were filled with shock. Although they were below the city wall and could not see the damage, the explosion was so powerful that it made their eardrums hurt. It was easy to imagine what would have happened to them if they were still standing on the city wall. Looking down from the sky, one could clearly see a strand of lush green emerging from the base of Wild Willow City. Very quickly, the entire city was dyed green. Countless tall vines extended into the sky, waving and swaying, completely covering the inside. It could even be said that Wild Willow City had already disappeared, and this place had become an incomparably dense forest. The ancient Tree of Life was fully activated, but it was not much of a threat to the orc warriors outside. At most, it would make them unable to find a target to attack. However, for the bloodthirsty warriors inside Wild Willow City, the consequences were fatal. Their range of activity was getting smaller and smaller. Under the situation where the entire city was changing, even if they were fast, they still needed space to protect themselves. In just a few breaths, all the bloodthirsty warriors were entangled by the omnipresent vines. They were like pitiful silkworms. No matter how hard they screamed and struggled, they could not break free at all. In fact, the bloodthirsty warriors were very elite orcs. They were a small team with special forces. Their individual combat strength was very high. The weakest of them was equivalent to a 6th or 7th grade human fighter. However, in the face of the Trant arrows that covered the entire city, they could only become caged birds. The thousands of thunderbirds continued to circle, constantly releasing lightning at the same place. As soon as the vines grew out, they were torn to pieces by the lightning. Then they grew out again and were torn to pieces again. Many elves noticed the intentions of the orcs and shot arrows into the sky through the gaps between the vines. However, the thunderbirds were 9th grade magical beasts after all. It was hard to imagine that an elf who had just learned archery could inflict heavy damage to a thunderbird. The weapons in the hands of the elves were not the legendary firearms that could be used by anyone. One after another, thunderbirds fell from the sky. Those were the results of the high-grade elves. Unfortunately, for the thousands of thunderbirds, this rate of loss was completely bearable. The thunderbirds continued to circle and release lightning, trying to blast a hole in the city wall. Outside the city, countless storm wolf warriors were running forward silently. Hundreds of mountain giants were following behind them. In their hands, there was an iron rod that was about 5 meters long and as thick as a human's thigh. The mountain giants were not only archers. Their close combat ability was not inferior to the storm wolf warriors. It could even be said that if they started killing each other, the hundreds of mountain giants could smash thousands of storm wolf warriors into meat paste. Perhaps they were angered by Sunir's response, or perhaps this was the fighting style of the orc commanders. As soon as the battle began, the orcs launched an all-out attack without holding back. There was a reason for the 2-hour agreement. If the orcs couldn't take down the city in 2 hours, there would be no point in continuing the battle. It would only cause more casualties. At this time, a fierce and strange magic fluctuation came from the distance. A layer of light green halo appeared on the bodies of all the Beastman warriors, including the bloodthirsty warriors. The vines binding them let out an inaudible but audible hiss and quickly retracted. The pitiful, bloodthirsty warriors who had been like caged birds had all regained their freedom. Some elves were responsible for killing the bloodthirsty warriors. They only felt a wave of magic wave, and then the vines retracted. Before they could react, the bloodthirsty warriors had already swung their scimitars. Such a large area of soul fire. Athena felt bitter in her mouth. She now believed Blanche's warning. It was indeed great shaman Uridin who came. The magic that the orc shamans mastered belonged to the category of soul magic. Compared to other types of magic, the system of soul magic was very weak and monotonous. It had almost no offensive magic, and the few defensive spells it had were also very pitiful. Other than communicating with magical beasts, the shamans could also make their warriors crazier and more ferocious. Of course, from a strategic point of view, the shamans were no less useful than traditional mages. This was because they could create a large group of crazy warriors who could still wield their weapons, even if their bones were exposed. Soul Fire could increase the combat power of the orcs in all aspects. Speed, strength, resistance, magic resistance, stamina, and so on would all be greatly improved. However, this kind of magic also had a side effect. The orcs who were affected by the Soul Fire would be listless for a long time because their life force would be damaged. The duration of this magic was very short. Even if great shaman Uridin personally cast it, it would be far less than 2 hours. However, this kind of magic was surprisingly effective against the ancient Tree of Life. The ancient Tree of Life didn't have any intelligence. It only attacked based on its instincts. When it came into contact with the orc warriors and felt its life force burning, it would immediately retreat. This was the instinct of life. As the ancient Tree of Life retreated, the situation immediately reversed. The bloodthirsty warriors were like fish in water in Wild Willow City. They swam everywhere, and the waving vines became obstacles for the elves. They couldn't lock onto the enemy's position. When they saw a figure flash, they immediately drew their longbows. However, the figure disappeared soon after. In another flash, the bloodthirsty warriors suddenly appeared in front of them and raised their shiny scimitars. Around Wild Willow City, as well as inside the city, there were nearly 10,000 tall ancient trees. The trees were covered with nuts of all sizes. Even though it was winter, the nuts would not fall off. The small ones weighed around 10 kilograms, while the big ones weighed more than 100 kilograms. The vines wrapped around the trees began to move. They wrapped around the nuts and shook their roots incessantly, as if they were soybean sprouts swaying in the wind. Then, one nut after another flew into the sky like birds returning to the forest, drawing arcs in the air as they smashed towards the heads of the storm wolf warriors. Countless elves hid in the vines. They didn't even care about the bloodthirsty warriors behind them. They desperately pulled their bowstrings and shot at the enemies in the air and on the ground. If you randomly chose a time to take a picture, you could see that the east side of Wild Willow City had become a giant sea urchin. Countless spikes pierced through the sky and covered the plains outside the east side of the city. The Gale Wolf warriors only raised their shields to block the falling nuts and arrows. They tried their best to move forward. From time to time, a warrior would be shot down or smashed to the ground. However, the rest of the warriors didn't seem to see anything. They didn't hesitate to step on the bodies of their comrades or stomp them into corpses and continue to charge forward. Equipment played a decisive role. Unless they were ambushed by a great elf, the orc warriors wouldn't be easily injured. How many elves could pierce through shields and armor with a single arrow? In Wild Willow City, there were pitifully few great elves. The elves in other parts of the city heard the alarm in the east side of the city and rushed over to help. When Blanche led the elves to Wild Willow City, the total number of elves in the city had reached more than 7,000. They already had the ability to adjust their tactics. However, as soon as the elves left their defensive area, a large number of orc warriors appeared in the north, south, and west of Wild Willow City. However, they were all infantry. Uridin's mission was to support the war zone and take down Wild Willow City, not to launch an attack alone. The reason he let the ragtag army attack later was to consider his own mana. Casting soul fire on these several thousand Gale Wolf warriors was already his limit. If those orc warriors who didn't have much combat power were added to the mix, there would only be one result. The spell would fail, and he would become a dried corpse. The elves' counterattack was very sharp. Unfortunately, it was too short. The Gale Wolf warriors didn't use any tactics to dodge. They just charged forward together. With the speed of the Gale Wolf warriors, it would only take them a dozen seconds to cover a distance of 700 meters. How many arrows could an elf shoot in that time? Sunir only had time to give a few orders. She told the elves to kill the bloodthirsty warriors that were trapped, and then focus on killing the thunderbirds in the sky. When she was about to give a third order, the Gale Wolf warriors outside the city had already arrived. With a loud bang, the city wall collapsed under the lightning released by the thunderbirds. Before the flying rubble could fall, the Gale Wolf warriors had already rushed to the bottom of the city wall and poured in through the gap. The whole process was as smooth as flowing water, as if they had already known that the city wall would collapse when they reached the bottom of the city wall. The thunderbirds in the sky began to rise into the sky. Their mission was completed, and there was no need to waste any more energy. Even the seemingly stupid hill giants were neatly divided into 2 rows. The front row continued to charge forward. When they were less than 20 meters away from Wild Willow City, they suddenly turned around and knelt on the ground. They threw away their iron rods and crossed their hands in front of them. The hill giants in the back row rushed over and stepped on their palms. Then, the hill giants who were kneeling on the ground stood up and threw their companions away. More than 50 huge bodies rose from the ground like dark clouds and jumped onto the 20-meter-tall city wall. This should be Uridan's last resort. Even if the Thunderbirds couldn't destroy the city wall, these hill giants could easily tear apart the elves' defense line. The hill giants were definitely a kind of tyrannical creatures. It was only because they were too stupid that they were looked down upon. However, their fighting strength was not to be underestimated. It was easy to imagine what kind of result would be if more than 50 10th grade powerhouses suddenly infiltrated the elves' defense line. It only took a total of 30 seconds to decide the outcome of the battle. It could already be described as fast as lightning. Every single elf was pulling their bowstrings with all their might. Within 30 seconds, not many of the elves were injured, because only the bloodthirsty warriors who had infiltrated their ranks were able to inflict any damage to them. Furthermore, their results were quite impressive. More than 100 Thunderbirds fell from the sky, and more than 300 Gale Wolf Knights, who were armed to the teeth, fell into pools of blood or were trampled into meat paste by their companions. To achieve such a result in less than 30 seconds was something to be proud of, even on the battlefield of large armies. Unfortunately, this was the result of the elves sacrificing all their advantages. Moreover, their efforts couldn't stop the orcs' lightning-fast battle. With the Thunderbirds quickly leaving the battlefield as the dividing line, the two sides were already entangled with each other. The enemy was often your best alchemy stone. This saying seemed a bit pretentious and cruel, but the truth behind it was very true. Forza had been fighting hard with Solomon. In order to deal with Solomon's invincible and invincible magic army, he had to establish his own advantages and style. The so-called lightning-fast battle was completely forced by Solomon. When fighting against the magic army, losses were inevitable. Instead of losing in vain, it was better to desperately get close to the enemy and gain some capital. In this way, the enemy would have some scruples in the next battle, so that Solomon wouldn't be too bold and bully them too much. Sunir's body trembled slightly. She wasn't afraid, but a kind of helplessness and powerlessness. For the first time, she experienced the feeling of not being punished by battle. This time, the orcs had definitely sent an elite force, but the elves she could command were a motley crew. There were more than 1,000 elves originally belonging to Wild Willow City, and nearly 6,000 elves from various tribes under Blanche's command. There were too many people to command. Moreover, the enemy knew everything about Wild Willow City and had already made a plan before the battle. Otherwise, they wouldn't have been able to fight so quickly and smoothly. She didn't know anything about the enemy. But in any case, the orcs had broken through the defense line in almost the blink of an eye. This was an unbearable shame. Chapter 391. The young orc suddenly stiffened. The orc warrior with a missing arm roared, "Watch out!" Then, he charged forward. The orc warrior had just moved when an extremely strong wave of energy flashed past. The orc warrior exploded like a bomb. Countless pieces of blood and bone flew in all directions. There were hundreds of elite orc warriors around the hill. They pulled out their scimitars at the same time, but they were all turned into statues before they could even draw out their scimitars. The young orc's face and body were covered in blood. He felt that something was blocking his vision. He slowly reached out and wiped his eyes. Only then did he realize that there was a piece of soft, sticky flesh on his fingertips. He couldn't help but shiver. He quietly rubbed his hand against his soft armor. His gaze became erratic. Han Jin's mental strength wasn't as strong as the vampire ancestor Alquite's, but it wasn't far off. The wave of mental strength he released just now was too strong. All the orc warriors understood his strength. As a matter of fact, there were many top-tier creatures on the continent, but there were very few superclass experts. The so-called top tier referred to those experts who were already standing at the peak of the world, and the superclass referred to those experts who had already surpassed the limits of ordinary understanding. They even had the power to challenge the laws of nature. It could also be said that there were many ways to deal with a top powerhouse, such as using numbers, sneak attacks, and so on. However, those methods were laughable when dealing with a true superpowerhouse. Most of the time, only another superpowerhouse or several superpowerhouses could deal with the superpowerhouse. Moreover, Han Jin was standing on the platform. The closest orc warrior was 20 meters away. No one thought that they could rush over in time to protect their masters before an ultra-grade creature could make a move. It was best not to act rashly at a time like this. The young orc also remained silent. Clearly, he also didn't think that his guards could save him. Han Jin slowly walked forward. The upper body of the orc warrior had already been smashed into pieces by Han Jin's divine sense, but the legs below were still intact and lying on the ground alone. Han Jin looked at it and suddenly turned his head to ask the young orc, "Does this guy have any children?" And no, the young orc didn't want to answer, but he didn't dare to not answer. "Unfortunately, your promise is destined not to be fulfilled." Han Jin smiled. He then looked up and quietly sized up the orc warriors around him. "I've never heard of an elf like you." A voice came from the wide chair. "I've never seen a fatty like you either." Han Jin smiled again. He was wearing a hat made of twigs and leaves that covered his ears. He was wearing standard elven archer leather armor. Apart from a pair of rare black eyes, he was no different from an elf. He was also very handsome, which was why he was mistaken for an elf. The old man sitting on the chair didn't say anything. His body was trembling violently, like waves of the sea. That old man was too fat. Han Jin was telling the truth. The media in his world was very developed, but he had never seen such a fat guy. The old man didn't look like an orc anymore. To be more precise, he would put a pumpkin on the ground, then fill it with liquid wax and slowly pour it down until the shape of the pumpkin couldn't be seen. The outside of the pumpkin would be covered with layers of wave-like folds. The old man sitting on the chair was similar to the pumpkin. He could be described as a seat, a pile, or even a lump. Anyway, he couldn't be described as a person. "Why aren't you calling your warriors back to save you?" Han Jin's gaze fell on the young orc again. "Do you need me to help you?" After saying that, Han Jin reached out and snatched the giant horn from the young orc. He looked at it for a moment and held it in front of him. Suddenly, a bugle sound that didn't sound like a military horn sounded. If another transmigrator from the Middle Earth came out, they would be stunned. That was because that melody was known to all. The little conch was blowing, and the seagulls were flying away after hearing it. The orcs in front of them were a bit confused. They had never heard such a strange bugle sound. Some orc warriors even looked back. "Master!" Athena grabbed Sunir's arm and hurriedly said, "We should retreat." Sunir was preparing to shoot her second arrow into the gap in the city wall. Athena was very frightened because Sunir would lose all her strength after shooting the second arrow. Now the sirens were everywhere, which meant that orcs were besieging Wild Willow City from all sides. The enemies on one side couldn't resist, so the fall of Wild Willow City was inevitable. Therefore, she had to protect Sunir. The relationship between the elves and the Holy Crown City was very complicated. Only a living Sunir could resolve the conflict between the two sides. Otherwise, who knew what that human lord would do? "Let go!" Sunir shouted. "Sunir!" Blanche grabbed Sunir's other arm. She had the same idea as Athena. "Don't be impulsive. We can't hold on any longer." Sunir's arrow didn't frighten the Gale Wolf warriors. A new tide rushed in from the gap again. The Gale Wolf warriors waved their shiny scimitars and showed a ferocious smile. They rushed to kill the elves. The vines would shrink back when they touched the Gale Wolf warriors. At this time, the Tree of Life couldn't do anything. What was even more frightening were the 50 or so hill giants in the city. They were like tall and sturdy warriors of steel. Their heavy armor and their body weight caused the ground to tremble as they ran. The 5-meter-long iron rods in their hands created bloody vortexes. Every time they swung their rods, one or several elves would have their bones broken. Some would even be smashed into unrecognizable puddles of blood on the spot. Mountain giants didn't need to train hard. They were born as level 10 creatures. There were only a few elves in Wild Willow City who had the strength of a ranger. Moreover, the mountain giants were wearing thick armor. They ignored the elves' attacks and only reaped the lives of the elves. Sunir also knew that they couldn't hold on to Wild Willow City anymore. However, she wasn't willing to give up just like that. Suddenly, an extremely arrogant laughter came from the front. Ha, ha, ha. Children, welcome back to the embrace of your father. At the same time, a mountain giant seemed to have seen something. He suddenly turned his head back and stretched out his huge palm to grab something in front of his eyes. The next moment, 2 clouds of blood mist burst out from his palm and eye socket. Then his body staggered 2 steps and fell down. Sunir was too familiar with that laughter. She didn't know where she got the strength from, but she struggled to break free from Athena and Blanche. She screamed, "Raphael? Raphael!" Of course, the one who laughed wasn't Hanjin, but Harley. Black smoke filled the air and spread. Finally, it condensed into a 50-meter-tall giant. He stepped forward with 1 foot and firmly blocked the gap in the city wall. In fact, Harley didn't have the ability to completely materialize. If the orcs pretended that they didn't see anything and kept rushing in, they could penetrate Harley's body. However, the problem was, who could ignore a 50-meter-tall giant? What made people feel even more helpless was that Harley actually turned into the appearance of the beast god Mangtai. This caused an extremely strong impact on the orcs. The warriors in the back were dumbfounded. The warriors in the front hurriedly stopped and tried their best to retreat, trying to avoid the giant leg that was so high that they couldn't see the end of it. Harley's toe was thicker than theirs. If they were stepped on, wouldn't they be flattened? "Little guys, don't be afraid, huh?" Harley laughed even more proudly. Hanjin came to save Sunir, but he didn't want to disturb Sunir. He only wanted to come quietly and leave quietly. Therefore, he told Harley to not make a move if he could. If he had to make a move, he just had to do it quietly and not talk nonsense. Unfortunately, it would be strange if Harley could control himself. Perhaps Hanjin was really careless. Perhaps, subconsciously, he didn't want to leave quietly. Therefore, even though he knew that Harley couldn't control his heroic emotions, he still let Harley take on the heavy responsibility. "You have failed." Hanjin also saw Harley's image. His expression changed slightly, then returned to normal. He let go of his hand, and the giant horn fell to the ground. Hanjin then stretched out 1 foot and stepped on the horn. "Do nothing? Just wait for death? This doesn't suit your style." The young orc's expression became very interesting when he saw his horn being crushed bit by bit. His muscles twitched uncontrollably, and there was viciousness, anger, and hatred in his eyes. But in the end, all the words he wanted to say turned into an ordinary question. "Who are you?" "He is Raphael." The old man, sitting on the chair, softly answered his companion's question. "Master Yuri-den is smart," Hanjin said softly. "Since you know my identity, you should do something, right? For example, use the soul chain? Are you still unwilling to give up your life at this time?" "You? How did you know?" The old man turned pale with fright. His pyramid-like body began to tremble again. His reaction should not have been so intense. The key was that the layers of fat on the outside were not under his control. The slightest movement of the wind and grass would cause them to undulate like the waves of the sea. "Of course I know. The soul chain is a spell that even superior dragons are afraid of. Don't you want to try it on me?" Hanjin smiled. "Do you want to try other methods?" "Forget it. Apart from the soul chain, all the other spells you know are useless against me." The old man looked at Hanjin as if he were looking at a demon. He didn't know how to answer. Seeing Hanjin suddenly appear, he was very relieved. He believed that Hanjin wouldn't dare to hurt him. The soul chain was an extremely evil spell. It could connect 2 unfamiliar souls together. If he died, Hanjin's soul would quickly wither. However, at this moment, he realized that Hanjin didn't seem to care at all. "And you guys, you can pull out your swords now." Hanjin's gaze fell on the orc warriors around him. "Don't worry, Before I kill all of you, I won't hurt the two of you." The orc warriors looked at each other and finally looked at the old man. The more Han Jin said this, the more worried they were. Perhaps Han Jin was giving them a warning. Boring. Really boring. Han Jin reached out and grabbed the hilt of the young orc's sword. He gently pulled it out and put it on the young orc's neck. "I'll say it again. Pull out your sword." When he heard the orcs thinking about how to distribute Sunir in the future, Han Jin's heart was filled with the desire to kill. However, the orc warriors didn't cooperate with him at all, which made him very unhappy. "No!" an orc warrior exclaimed. He immediately pulled out his sword and threw it on the ground. The other orc warriors followed suit. In the blink of an eye, scimitars were thrown all over the ground. Some orc warriors even began to take off their armor to show their sincerity. The young orc was Forza's favorite son. If he was hurt, they would not be able to absolve themselves from the blame. Therefore, they would rather choose to disarm themselves or even surrender. "You misunderstood me." Han Jin sighed sincerely. Then, he gently waved his right hand. Blood bloomed, and a blood-stained head flew more than a meter high and rolled on the ground. The headless body also fell down softly. "I'm asking you to pull out your swords and start fighting." The orc warriors were stunned. The orcs who were taking off their armor also stopped and stared at Han Jin blankly. After a long time, an orc warrior roared, bent down, picked up his sword, and rushed toward Han Jin with bloodshot eyes. "That's more like it." Han Jin took a deep breath and then smiled comfortably. The orc warrior's speed was extremely fast. Even in isolated Cliff City, he was qualified to be one of the top mercenaries. However, Han Jin was a monster that couldn't be judged by common sense. He had the same talent as the demons from the abyss, and his spiritual power was incomparable to Alquite's. His Dao arts were not inferior to any traditional magician's. Han Jin was an omnipotent monster that could soar into the sky and dive into the ground, capable of both long-range and short-range attacks. Han Jin's body flashed, and he appeared on the side of the orc warrior. He swung his fist and hit the orc warrior's cheek at the same time. With a muffled sound, the orc warrior's head and helmet became twisted. His body flew more than 10 meters away, and two other orc warriors were knocked to the ground. More orc warriors picked up their scimitars and fearlessly rushed toward Han Jin. Forza's favorite son was killed by the enemy in an unreasonable way. Anyway, they couldn't live anymore. Bang, bang, bang. A series of muffled sounds that seemed to come from hell came one after another. Han Jin's body flashed everywhere, as if he had become thousands of incarnations. There were hundreds of shamans around him, and a large group of thunderbirds began to dive at a low altitude under their control, trying to release a group attack. However, Han Jin never stayed in one place for more than half a second. At this moment, he was even more terrifying than the abyss demons. The thunderbirds couldn't lock onto Han Jin at all. Bang, bang, bang. Han Jin wasn't killing the enemy. He was smashing them with his tyrannical strength and his condensed mind power. Every orc warrior that was hit by him had their bodies twisted out of shape. From a rational point of view, Han Jin should release his Taoist magic to quickly deal with all the enemies, and then support Wild Willow City. However, it was too tiring to stay rational all the time. People always needed to vent, and now Han Jin chose to vent. The orc warriors waved their scimitars blankly, sometimes rushing to the east, sometimes rushing to the west. They didn't know where the enemy would appear in the next moment. They couldn't do anything except run blankly and be killed helplessly. It was as if they were ants in front of God. "You guys go." Yuridin suddenly howled. "Tell the king what happened here. Quick." He accepted his fate. Others could escape, but he definitely couldn't. "Go!" Han Jin sneered. A purple light appeared in Han Jin's hand, and then turned into a resplendent and deep ball of light. "Rise!" Along with Han Jin's shout, thousands of purple light spots shot out. Each light spot turned into a sword that looked like a stream of light. The heavy armor worn by the orc warriors was riddled with holes like fragile pieces of paper. Their bodies couldn't even withstand a single blow and were instantly shredded into pieces. The sword light went from a weak, almost infinitely small light spot to covering the entire world. Countless sword lights even approached Wild Willow City, which was 1,000 meters away. The feeling that made people tremble from the depths of their souls far surpassed the dragon's aura. Moreover, the sword light didn't disappear. It kept moving and circling. Many orcs couldn't help but bend down. Some elves who were still fighting bitterly on the city wall also screamed and jumped down from the city wall. Uridin only saw a purple ball of light suddenly bloom in front of his eyes. The next moment, he found that the warriors and hundreds of shamans around him had all fallen into a pool of blood. Not a single corpse was intact. The thunderbirds in the sky also panicked and flew away. In front of this kind of power, not to mention that the shamans were all dead, even if there were still shamans controlling them, they wouldn't continue to fight. After all, they were magical beasts. They couldn't be as fearless as the orc warriors. Hanjin slowly approached Uridin and kicked the chair leg. Uridin couldn't help but roll on the ground. Uridin's body weighed more than 1,000 pounds. It was really difficult for him to get up with his own strength. Uridin kept struggling and gasping for breath, but he couldn't sit up. Hanjin grabbed Uridin's hair and dragged him towards Wild Willow City. He wasn't fast, but it was hard for Uridin to keep up. He was screaming in pain and was so tired that he was rolling and crawling. It was indeed a bit too much to deal with an old man like this. However, Hanjin didn't treat these orcs who trampled and destroyed all kinds of civilizations as humans. All the orc warriors understood what was happening behind them. They stopped attacking the city and raised their heads to look behind. Soon, they saw a man dragging their respected great shaman out of the bright nebula. Their great shaman was crawling on the ground like a dog. For the orcs, this was an unbearable insult. Forza was their king, and the great shaman Uridin was their spiritual leader. Chapter 392. All of the elves noticed the anomaly. The orc warriors, including the mountain giants and bloodthirsty warriors, had gone mad. They no longer cared about the elves' attacks and desperately rushed out of the city through the gap. Harley laughed strangely and made way for them. The orcs were pushing and squeezing each other, trying to rush out of the city. What kind of magic is that? Athena's expression was a little sluggish. She looked up at the countless spiraling swords in the sky. Sunir didn't have time to answer. She used her fastest speed to return to the city wall. When she saw that familiar figure, Sunir felt a little dizzy. She couldn't help but grab onto the vines in front of her to stabilize herself. She didn't know how long it had been. When she was lonely, when she was desperate, when she was struggling, every time she fell asleep, every time she woke up, and even in her dreams, she couldn't help but think of him. Sunir didn't know, at least not when she was with Hanjin. That missing someone was so painful. Sunir also felt something spurt out from her chest. It turned into a warm liquid and poured out from her eyes. It wasn't tears, it was sadness, but also satisfaction. She had to put her hand on her chest to let her breathe more smoothly. She didn't expect that happiness could become so heavy that it even made her suffocate. Athena and Blanche also rushed to the city wall. Blanche and Hanjin were old acquaintances, but Athena only had a general impression of Hanjin from various rumors. She stared at the figure in the distance and murmured, "That man." Hanjin had always been very gentle in the midst of the orcs' crazy attacks. But at this time, there was little difference between being gentle and being cold. He ignored the orcs' grief and anger. A few dozen hill giants were charging at the front. They charged with all their might, and their speed was even faster than the Gale Wolves. They raised their thick iron rods and roared. If they were not worried about accidentally injuring Uridin, who was crawling on the ground, they would have thrown their iron rods at him. The wind wolf warriors in the back were also desperately waving their scimitars. Like an unstoppable tide, every warrior locked their eyes on Hanjin. If looks could kill, then Hanjin would have been pierced full of holes by now. The distance between the two sides was getting closer and closer. Hanjin let go of Uridin's hair and quietly scanned the front. In the beginning, when he was baptized by thousands of gazes, he was more or less not used to it. But as time passed, he gradually got used to it. He also knew that sitting in this position, he had to remain calm under the gazes of others, whether it was hatred or respect in their eyes. Just as the mountain giants rushed over 100 meters, Han Jin pulled back his hands and slowly put them together in front of his chest. The purple nebula that filled the sky followed Han Jin's movements and flowed towards Han Jin like flowing water. Then, Han Jin's right hand formed a spell and slowly pushed forward. A bright light bloomed once again. In this faint night, the deep purple light was particularly mysterious. Every light spot turned into a sword of light and instantly split into thousands of sword shadows. When the mountain giants saw the sword shadows shooting towards them, they subconsciously wanted to dodge, but they soon realized that dodging was meaningless. If it was just a few sword shadows, then it would be easy to dodge. However, the layers of sword shadows formed a monstrous wave. No matter where they hid, they would have to bear the attack of thousands of sword lights. The mountain giants at the front roared and swung their iron rods as they jumped into the sword waves. A scene that made all the elves dumbfounded and uneasy appeared. The sword shadows that didn't seem real were much sharper than they had imagined. In just an instant, they pierced through the entire charging formation of the beastmen and flew towards Wild Willow City. Along the way, they pierced through countless beastmen's bodies. Then there was a second, a third, and wave after wave. It was like an endless ocean. Under the tens of thousands of sword lights, all the beastmen's bodies were shattered into pieces. However, this was not the end. The elf could only watch as a beastman's head flew up and was split in half by the sword lights. Then, the endless sword lights continued to shoot forward. That broken head was split into 4 halves, 8 halves, and finally shattered into pieces. The thick armor was turned into pieces of rags and then continued to disintegrate under the sword lights. The wind wolf's fur fluttered in the air, and the beastman's broken limbs and flesh flew up and down. Within a radius of 1,000 meters, nothing could escape the sword lights. Even the blood that splashed out couldn't fall to the ground. As soon as it bloomed, it was cut into countless drops of blood by the omnipresent sword lights. Some were even twisted into a bloody mist. Finally, the sword lights disappeared. In the eyes of the elves, the thousands of beastmen and the wind wolf's flesh and blood seemed to have turned into a huge pie floating in the air. It was impossible to separate them or identify them. Without the support of the sword lights, the huge pie almost hit the ground at the same time, making a series of deep sounds. The elves who had been through many bloody battles couldn't bear such a scene. Some of their faces turned pale, and some of them even bent down and vomited violently. Athena's eyes were blank, and she couldn't speak clearly. Why? Han Jin's magic was too terrifying. He was indeed a true superclass master. She couldn't understand why the Senate would deliberately reject Han Jin, an ally with the Beastmen. All the elves were stunned by Han Jin's magic, but Sunir was an exception. Ever since she saw Han Jin, her eyes never left Han Jin. She ignored everything else, just like how Han Jin ignored the Beastmen. Han Jin slowly raised his head and looked at Sunir from afar. He had already noticed Sunir's gaze, but he didn't dare to face it. With Han Jin's current strength and status, there was almost nothing that he didn't dare to do. At most, he didn't want to. There were very few things that could make him afraid. When Han Jin looked over, Sunir smiled. Her smile was as beautiful as a rainbow. She then jumped down from the city wall, leaving behind a trail of sparkling tears. Coincidentally or not, Sunir landed in front of a mountain giant. That was the last mountain giant. Because he was too close to Wild Willow City, Han Jin didn't want to hurt any elves, so he controlled the range of his sword wave and let the mountain giant escape. If he had waved his iron rod, he could have attacked the defenseless Sunir from behind. As for whether he could succeed or not, only the heavens knew. The key was that he didn't do anything. He just stared blankly at the bloody world in front of him. He didn't want to believe that so many of his companions had all disappeared in the blink of an eye. Sunir flew forward like a swift. Her target was, of course, Han Jin. Unfortunately, her eyes were blurred by tears, and she couldn't see Han Jin's expression. After a few breaths of time, under the gaze of countless elves, she threw herself into Han Jin's arms. In the past, Sunir was very reserved and very proud. But now, she didn't have any self-control. She was lonely day after day, and she had accumulated too much yearning. She needed to pour it all out. Han Jin didn't move at first and let Sunir hug him. But when he smelled Sunir's familiar scent, his breathing became hurried. Finally, he slowly raised his hand and gently stroked Sunir's smooth hair. When his hand slowly slid down to Sunir's waist, he suddenly used his strength and tightly hugged her waist. Sunir wasn't the only one who couldn't control his emotions. Sunir was the same. It was to the point that he forgot how strong he was. His blue veins were popping out of his arms, and it was as if he wanted to break Sunir's waist. Sunir let out a painful but happy moan. Her chest and Han Jin's were tightly pressed together. She could even feel Han Jin's violent heartbeat. Of course, her heart was also beating rapidly. "You are my..." Han Jin said softly. His tone was slow and firm, as if he was making an oath that no one could change. "Yes." Sunir nodded vigorously. Although she didn't understand why Han Jin would say such things without rhyme or reason, she felt happy and satisfied. That was enough. Yuridin quietly raised his head and looked ahead with a pair of eyes that were as small as needles. He wasn't looking at Han Jin, but at Sunir. With Han Jin's incomprehensible strength and arrogant confidence, attacking Han Jin with the soul chain shouldn't have any effect. However, that female elf named Sunir was different. If he succeeded, wouldn't Han Jin be very sad? Yuridin's lips curled into a sinister smile. At this moment, a black object suddenly appeared in front of Yuridin and blocked his vision. That object moved as if someone was blinking their eyes. Then, a wisp of smoke floated out from that object and condensed into a finger. The next moment, the finger stood upright and slowly shook a few times. Yuridin suddenly felt as if he had fallen into an ice cave. He was a great shaman and was very proficient in soul magic. Therefore, he immediately sensed the powerful soul power hidden in that black object. Could it be that Raphael also knew soul magic? Yuridin nodded timidly, indicating that he understood. Since Han Jin didn't kill him on the spot, it meant that he was still useful. Yuridin shouldn't act rashly and think of a way to survive. That black object slowly spun and became smaller and smaller. Then, with a whoosh, it shot into Yuridin's eye socket. Yuridin was caught off guard. He roared and covered his eyes with his fat hands. Then, his head quickly inflated like a balloon. Yuridin misunderstood Harley's meaning. Harley was saying that Yuridin was no match for him. Harley had always been a man without compassion. He only wanted to be the hero in the limelight and kill Elder Maxwell of Dragon City. He had told this story countless times to the point that it was annoying. He desperately needed a new battle record. Although the great shaman of the orc race was not as powerful as the Elder of Dragon City, he was still a decent opponent. It would be strange if Harley let Yuridin go. Moreover, Harley knew Han Jin's thoughts the best. The orcs were a race that was destined to be completely destroyed. There was no need for him to show mercy. Yuridin's roar woke Sunir up. She twisted, but Han Jin was still holding her tightly. Sunir accepted it. She whispered in Han Jin's ear, "Raphael, I miss you too." Han Jin let out a soft sigh. The elves in the distance were still watching. Even Blanche, who was familiar with Han Jin, did not want to disturb the couple who had been separated for a long time. Of course, time was not the key. Too many things had happened after Han Jin and Sunir separated. Could they really return to the past? Blanche hoped so, but she did not dare to believe it. After hesitating for a moment, she turned and walked down the city. "Blanche, where are you going?" Athena hurriedly asked. "Don't disturb them. I'm going to find Louise and Panvin. They are old friends with Raphael. I hope they can help us, otherwise." Blanche smiled bitterly. With a bang, Yuridin's head exploded. Blood and flesh splattered everywhere. This time, Hanjin was also shocked awake. Hugging Sunir here for an entire day would not make up for anything. The problem had to be solved eventually. Hanjin slowly let go of Sunir. With a wave of his hand, a bright purple cluster of stars shrunk under his and Sunir's feet. They flew up like a cloud, away from the dirty battlefield. They flew all the way to the sky above Wild Willow City before slowly descending. Although Sunir had separated from Hanjin, she was still holding on to Hanjin's hand. It was as if Hanjin would disappear if she let go. Her face was slightly red. After all, she had been intimate with Hanjin in front of so many people. However, she was more happy. The beautiful smile on her face showed that it came from the bottom of her heart. Raphael, come, let me introduce you. Sunir stretched out her other hand and waved at Athena. This is Athena, the commander of Wild Willow City. Hello, Lord Raphael. Athena respectfully bowed to Hanjin and then said in a self-deprecating tone, "What kind of commander am I? If it wasn't for Lord Sunir, Wild Willow City would have fallen a long time ago." Sunir saw Athena's respectful attitude and smiled sweetly in her heart. Great Elder Amdul wanted her to marry Prudence. This was a huge pressure for her. Although she had unlocked the mark of God, she still felt like she was alone. Seeing that Hanjin had won the general respect of the elves, Sunir was very happy. She was more and more confident that she could convince Amdul. Of course, she didn't want Hanjin to know because she didn't want Hanjin to have a bad impression of her people. Also, she was too competitive. If it wasn't for that, she was willing to quietly bear the pressure herself. Hanjin nodded to Athena as a greeting. Raphael, I found that you don't seem to like talking. After being excited, Sunir finally felt the abnormal change in Hanjin. She just nodded. This kind of attitude seemed a bit arrogant. In the past, Hanjin always gave people a warm and sunny feeling. Although he was just as warm now, he was emitting a feeling that kept people thousands of miles away. No, Hanjin smiled and then added, Athena, nice to meet you. For me, this is a kind of honor. Athena bowed to Hanjin again. At this time, a shout came from below the city wall. Raphael! Raphael! Along with the shout, Louise and Panvin strode up the stairs. Hanjin paused and said slowly, Long time no see. How have you been? In the blink of an eye, more than a year had passed. Louise and Panvin had changed a lot. Louise had become more mature. Her face was less lively and had more vicissitudes of life. When a country was destroyed, even the stupidest person would have their own understanding after experiencing this. Panvin's hair had turned white, but his body still looked very strong, at least better than most magicians. We're okay, Louise smiled and said, but we can't compare to you. You're so cool. Hee. Hanjin had traveled thousands of miles to deliver a warning for them. So in Louise's heart, Hanjin was definitely one of her few friends. Yes, Panvin also smiled and said, in a desperate situation where you were sealed, you still managed to kill Dragon City, Elder Maxwell. This is simply a legend that can be recorded in history. Hanjin sighed in his heart. This topic was brought up at the wrong time. He gave Panvin a look, but in his heart, he knew that it was a bit too late. What's going on? Sunir frowned and said, Dragon City, Elder Maxwell, your sister Sunir, right? I've heard of your name a long time ago and have always wanted to meet you. Louise giggled and said, You're even more beautiful than I imagined. Who can tell me what's going on? Sunir's voice became serious. She wouldn't let anyone change the topic so easily. Louise wasn't angry at being mercilessly humiliated. She looked at Hanjin with an apologetic gaze. At this time, she also knew that she had said something wrong. The elves were speechless. No one wanted to say anything, and no one dared to say anything. If they could, they would have told Sunir everything. Raphael, you tell me what's going on. Sunir's gaze fell on Hanjin. It's already over. Hanjin said softly. I want to hear it. Sunir decisively interrupted Hanjin's words. She could quietly bear the pressure that should have belonged to the two of them, but she would never allow anyone to force Han Jin to endure anything. At this moment, Sunir finally understood why Blanche, Athena, and the other elves' expressions were so strange. It was very likely that the elves had done something wrong to Han Jin, and Pugila wanted to kill me. So he invited Dragon City Elder Maxwell and Prudence. They worked together to ambush me. Han Jin understated it, but he hid one important thing. The trap was to use the fake Sunir as bait. And then, Sunir couldn't be as relaxed as Han Jin. Her voice and body were trembling slightly. Dragon City Elder Maxwell was still in existence that she had to look up to. Chapter 393. Maxwell is dead, Prudence escaped, but I'm still alive. Han Jin said lightly. Sunir looked at Han Jin quietly. Although Han Jin said it casually, she knew that Han Jin must have experienced a thrilling battle to survive the joint attack of Maxwell and Prudence. Why did they actually, not long after you returned to Wild Willow City, the elves launched an attack on the Bite Man? Sunir felt as if she had been struck by lightning. Her body was tottering, so Athena had to step forward to support Sunir. But Sunir didn't need it. She slowly stretched out her hand, grabbed Athena's wrist, and forced Athena's hand to one side. She used so much strength that she even left a blue mark on Athena's wrist. Athena hesitated for a moment, then lowered her head and didn't make any more movements. Where were you at that time? Guevara and I went to the underground city with the army, ready to settle the score with Segund. Han Jin said softly. The elven allied forces seized a good opportunity and easily occupied the Bite Man and Black Raven City. Sunir shook her head slowly, as if she didn't believe it. She glanced at the elves, but wherever Sunir looked, the elves lowered their heads and didn't dare to look at Sunir. Only Sunir was kept in the dark. The other elves had already known about it. When they took action, they didn't think much of it. After all, they were fighting for the glory of the Elven Empire. But now, when they heard the story of the victim, they all felt ashamed. And then, Sunir's tone sounded very strained. The Elven allied forces began to attack the Holy Crown City, but they suffered a small loss. Winter came, and the Elven allied forces temporarily stopped fighting. I took advantage of the chaos to kill Dismark, occupied the Holy Crown City, and smoothly took over the Holy Crown City's army. Han Jin said slowly, and Pugila was very ambitious. Not only did he want to occupy my Holy Crown City, but he also wanted to occupy Depew City and Cold Shadow City. But the Elven allied forces couldn't fight in winter, and he didn't want me to gain a firm foothold. So he allied with the orcs and planned to use the orc warriors as his vanguard to continue attacking the Holy Crown City. And then, just like that, the orcs suddenly launched an attack on the elves. Sunir quietly looked at Han Jin. She finally understood why she couldn't get rid of the strange feeling in her heart. It was a strange feeling. At this moment, Han Jin seemed to be a stranger to her. She could understand that after the sudden attack of the elves, followed by the joint attack of Maxwell and Prudence, Han Jin's impression of the elves must have changed drastically. But at the same time, Sunir felt aggrieved, a tragic, aggrieved feeling. She didn't know anything and didn't do anything. Would Han Jin be estranged from her because of this? Raphael, I didn't betray you, Sunir said in a trembling voice. She had mustered up all her courage to say this. No matter what the reason was, when a person said this, she was already a weakling. If there were other choices, Sunir would never throw away her pride. But now it was different. That relationship had carried too much happiness and hope for her. In order to make up for it, in order to save it, she was willing to give it up. I know. Han Jin's gaze had quietly shifted elsewhere. Master Raphael, why did you come to Wild Willow City? Blanche felt that the conversation was not going well, so she hurriedly changed the topic. Master received news that Forza had sent Grand Shaman Uridin to support the Wild Willow City war zone. Of course, I had to come and take a look. Harley laughed strangely. Master, the other places haven't finished yet. Shall I go and take a look? Uridin's elites had been completely wiped out, But the orcs on the other three sides didn't know the situation in the East City. They were still fiercely attacking Wild Willow City. Only then did Athena and Blanche realize that the battle wasn't over yet. They seemed a little irresponsible. Although those orc warriors didn't have the protection of the soul fire and couldn't break through the protection of the ancient tree of life, they still had to go and take a look. Athena and Blanche looked at each other. Athena whispered something in Sunir's ear, and then they split into two groups to support the other sides. Sunir's gaze was always on Hanjin. She didn't care about Athena at all. She just wanted to continue looking at Hanjin and see through Hanjin's heart. Although Harley had already told her the purpose of Hanjin's trip, which made her feel a little better, she couldn't get rid of a bad feeling. "Sunir, let's go somewhere else," Hanjin said slowly. "Okay." Sunir responded softly. Louise and Panvin felt a little awkward because they had said the wrong thing. Of course, they wouldn't disturb Hanjin and Sunir, although they also wanted to talk to Hanjin. The two of them stopped in place and watched Hanjin and Sunir walk away with their gazes. The longer they walked, the more Sunir could feel the unfamiliarity of Hanjin. In her imagination, the two of them should be very excited after meeting, talking to each other, greeting each other, and even being intimate. However, Hanjin became very quiet, which made her feel at a loss. Sunir wanted to pull Hanjin's hand more than once, but when she peeked at Hanjin's calm and tranquil expression, she couldn't reach out her hand no matter how hard she tried. An invisible pressure enveloped her heart. In fact, Hanjin was still thinking, "Say it, or don't say it." If he said it, he would be a little worried. Even he almost couldn't control himself. Was Sunir really as strong as he thought? Even if he didn't say it, things had to be solved eventually. Dragging it out was definitely not a solution. After hesitating for a long time, Hanjin finally decided that it was more appropriate for Gao Bin and Sunir to talk about this matter. Before dealing with Forza, he wouldn't have the chance to contact the elves again. During this time, Sunir's emotions had also been stabilized. She should be able to calm down and think about their future carefully. At least, it wouldn't be irreparable. Thinking of Gao Bin, Hanjin also thought of another thing. He suddenly stopped and took Sunir's hand. At this time, he found that Sunir's hand had become cold and wet, as if she was sweating. Sunir also stopped and looked at Hanjin seriously. "Sunir, you made a big mistake." Hanjin showed a wry smile. "Me? What mistake?" Sunir's heart couldn't help but beat wildly. "You should tell me about Hazel's matter." Hanjin whispered. "Maybe I have a chance to save her." "What happened to Hazel?" Sunir was surprised. "She died. Hanjin paused for a moment and told her the scene at that time. If he had known about the relationship between Hazel and them, he would have found a way. Although it was unrealistic to save Hazel in the camp of the Abyss race, and his strength was far less than it was now, he could have secretly cast a spell on Hazel so that she could hold on longer. Then, he would have looked for other opportunities. Unfortunately, he only had a slightly good impression of Hazel at that time. He felt that Hazel's loyalty was commendable because she was willing to fight to the death for Zagund. Moreover, when he stood under Hazel's body, he saw a kind of begging in her eyes. She wasn't begging for life, but begging for death. Therefore, he set the fire and fulfilled Hazel's wish. Just as Hanjin was worried, no matter who it was, and no matter how strong he or she was, there was always a bottom line. Sunir knew that the elves had suddenly launched a large-scale attack on Hanjin. She knew that Prudence and Maxwell had set a fatal trap for Hanjin. This had already put a lot of pressure on her. Now that she heard the news of Hazel's death, and in such a miserable way, she couldn't take it anymore. Her clear eyes became dull as she stared at Hanjin without moving. "I know your concerns." Hazel abandoned herself and became a dark elf. Moreover, the person she was loyal to, Zagund, is my mortal enemy. So, you don't want me to misunderstand, and you don't want to trouble me. You think it's not too late to tell me at the last moment, right? This is war. No matter how wise you are, you can only vaguely grasp the direction of the war. It's impossible for you to predict every detail of it. Hazel may be a genius, but because of the setback in her relationship, She hasn't made any progress in the past few decades. Any accident can take away her life. Will you be able to stop in time? Han Jin slowly said, "Don't be like this, understand? You don't want to trouble me, but sometimes you make me even more troubled. No matter what happens in the future, you must tell me." Sunir's heart was filled with both sadness and joy. She was happy because Han Jin didn't seem to care about the conflict with the elves. Since there was a future, of course it belonged to them. However, Hazel's life was already gone, and this made her feel sad. Sunir looked up. Han Jin's face quickly became blurry. Tears seeped out of her eyes and dripped down her cheeks. She murmured, "It's my fault. It's my fault. It's her own fault." Han Jin softly said, when she decided to fight to the death for Zagund, she had already decided her own fate. To be honest, maybe I had a chance to save her, but I couldn't protect her from harm. I guess, even if I saved her, she wouldn't be able to live. At that time, he really couldn't protect Hazel. Saving and protecting were two completely different things. Han Jin was able to pose a huge threat to Zagund and Alquid because he was free and unrestrained. He could fight and leave whenever he wanted. If he deliberately protected Hazel, with Alquid's cunning, she would definitely see through it. If that happened, not only would he not be able to save Hazel, but he would also be in danger. You don't understand. Sunir leaned weakly in Han Jin's arms. Her tears flowed even more. How can I meet Lydia? How can I meet your brother Galbin? Even though she was in grief, Sunir was still shocked. She couldn't help but wipe away her tears, trying to see Han Jin's expression clearly. Didn't anyone tell you that your brother, Galbin, has returned? Han Jin smiled, and he has already kicked Prudence out of power and become the actual commander of the Elven army. Brother? Sunir's brain was close to shutting down. After staying in the illusion for a few months, she didn't expect the world to change so much. The shocking news came one after another. Sunir quickly reacted and asked, "You've seen him?" "I've seen him." Han Jin nodded. "He didn't say anything?" "You mean, how was the talk with me?" Sunir nodded. She couldn't help but put more strength into her hands. Han Jin immediately felt her nervousness. For the current Sunir, her people had set up too many obstacles for her. They did everything they could to destroy the relationship between her and Han Jin. It almost made her feel like she was betrayed by everyone. If her brother also opposed this relationship, it would be a fatal blow to her. Did this world have to force her to walk down the path of no return like Hazel? It went well. Your brother kept calling me brother and drinking with me. Han Jin smiled. I can see that your brother is a very pure drunkard. Don't talk about him like that. Sunir felt warm when she heard Han Jin talk about Galbin. She also wanted to laugh, but the news of Hazel's death weighed heavily on her heart. She couldn't laugh. He's my brother. He's also your brother. I know. That's why I'm worried about him, Han Jin said. He was thinking about what would happen if Sunir knew about them. Perhaps the best way to relieve the pain was to let Sunir know that her other family member needed help more. What happened to him? Sunir hurriedly asked. Didn't I tell you just now? I've told him about Hazel's matter. Sunir widened her eyes. She could imagine how sorrowful Galbin must have been at that time, without being told by others. Your brother lives a very real life. He's sincere and never pretentious. Han Jin said softly. Because of this, I'm even more worried about him. I'm afraid that he'll lose his mind. Fortunately, he has Lydia by his side. Sunir, what's the relationship between your brother and Lydia? They're good friends. Sunir's voice was a little low. Just good friends? Han Jin asked. Yes, what about it? Sunir asked. When Galbin was troubled by love and left Wild Willow City, she was still young and didn't know about the emotional entanglements between her brother and sister. She only knew that her brother liked Hazel very much. Later, because of a human woman, he had a bloody conflict with the Senate of Wild Willow City and had to leave temporarily. Your brother's judgment is really slow when it comes to love. Han Jin smiled helplessly. Maybe he really only sees Lydia as a good friend, but Lydia's feelings for Galbin are not simple. Lydia's feelings for my brother. Sunir was surprised. Yes. Hanjin nodded. Lydia's consideration and obedience to Gao Bin. Even an outsider like me feels a little jealous. She only sees Gao Bin as a good friend? Haha, I don't believe it. Lydia has always been my brother's assistant. So, this is normal, right? You'll understand when you see it for yourself. Hanjin smiled and said, as long as you're not blind, I believe you can see Lydia's feelings for him. Sunir seriously thought about the possibility of bringing Lydia and Gao Bin together. Your brother's emotions are very unstable right now. When I told him about Hazel, Hanjin sighed. Let's not talk about it, Sunir. Lydia alone won't be enough to comfort him. He still needs you as a sister. Do you understand what I mean? I understand. Sunir's eyes gradually regained their light. Hanjin was so considerate of her brother, which meant that Hanjin really didn't care about what the elves had done to him. This made her very happy, and the pressure that made her breathless disappeared. It's good that you know. Hanjin was speaking from the bottom of his heart. You just said that my brother has become the actual commander of the elven army? What about Prudence? He has made too many mistakes. Not to mention the other tribes. Even the elven warriors of the Southern Forest tribe don't want to obey his orders anymore. Sunir was silent for a moment. Raphael, you told me that no matter what happens in the future, I'll tell you. Are you serious? Of course I am. Hanjin felt that something was wrong. He stared at Sunir and asked, what's wrong? Then I'll tell you. But don't stop me, okay? Tell me first, what is it? Hanjin didn't dare to make a promise rashly. Promise me. Sunir didn't fall for it. Oh, okay. Hanjin said reluctantly. I'm going to kill Prudence. Sunir said word by word. At this moment, Sunir suddenly exuded an extraordinary aura. Her eyes were like spring water, clear and sharp. Before, she was nervous and scared because she didn't know how Hanjin would treat their relationship. Now that she felt Hanjin's warmth, she had regained her confidence. Then, someone or some other despicable bastard must pay the price. She was going to protect the most important thing in her life. What did you say? Hanjin was shocked. He also wanted to kill Prudence, and he had already acted on it. But he never expected Sunir to do this. Sunir valued her people very much. Why would she choose to kill her own people? I'm going to kill Prudence, Sunir repeated. She said in an extremely serious tone. Raphael, don't try to stop me. I won't listen to you on this matter. Hanjin stared at Sunir. This was an elf who dared to love and hate. Her attitude was very firm. If he couldn't stop her, then the Senate and her brother Gao Bin wouldn't be able to stop her. Let's not talk about this. Hanjin said softly. I don't have much time. Let's talk about something else. You're leaving? Sunir immediately understood the hidden meaning in Hanjin's words. Yes. Hanjin nodded. Also, I've already prepared a grave for Prudence. Sunir, you must listen to me this time. Otherwise, you'll ruin my overall plan. A grave? Sunir was stunned. You're tuning into the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.